Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching second and final part of What If Naruto Was Broken and Trained by Fem-Kyuubi. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
When Naruto said, "Hello to you too, Orochimaru," the Kusa-nin narrowed her eyes at the blonde. The Kusa-nin asked, "How did you figure it out?" as he tore off his mask, exposing one of the Sanin's face and releasing so much ki that Sasuke and Yakumo nearly passed out. "During the first exams, you were staring too much at me and Sasuke, plus no matter how good you hid it, your ki was still waving off charts, that and you smell like snakes." As he launched his assault, the Sanin remarked, "I'll remember that the next time." The blonde squinted as he came into view of Sasuke Tanto, who had already drawn him in time to stop the Snake Man's attack. "Oh?" Orochimaru asked, impressed by the blonde's prompt response. "Now!" exclaimed Naruto, leaping back just in time to dodge a lightning bolt and a fireball that were en route to Orochimaru to Yakumo and Sasuke's surprise. They discovered a destroyed lump of clay rather than a damaged Snake Man after the attacks created a cloud of dust. Naruto heard the words, "Futon Daitapa," as he was launched through the forest by an Orochimaru. As he landed, Naruto thought, "Shit." He had just enough time to use Kawarimi to avoid a giant snake that suddenly materialized, its mouth wide open and ready to devour him. Another snake attempted to eat Naruto, causing him to backflip several times. Naruto gritted his teeth and searched for his teammates as he attempted to avoid the first and second snakes. He remarked, "Stupid Snake Man must be attacking them now," as a second snake suddenly materialized. As he continued to dodge the three enormous snakes' attack, the blonde thought, "Shit. Nay." The Biju replied, "On it," and started directing chakra into the blonde's body. The blonde said, "Well, it's time to give this a try." He was examining the three snakes in front of him when he opened his eyes and saw a few spots that he could easily take advantage of. "Sensa, flash dash," the blonde said, vanishing behind the two snakes in a yellow blur. He declared that, "You are already dead," as the two snakes collapsed to the ground, their lives long since over. The blonde's eyes widened at the sound, and he instantly used Sensa to communicate with his teammates. Just a short while ago Sasuke thought, "Shit." With both of his sharing blazing, he was a true S-rank ninja who handled everything that Yakumo and he threw at him with a shrug. The Snake Man tried to annoy the Uchiha by saying, My, I'm not impressed, Sasuke. I was expecting better from the last Uchiha." Sasuke only uttered, "Well, fuck you," as the Sanin kicked him in the stomach. Orochimaru looked at Sasuke and asked, "What was that?" The Uchiha pulled out a shuriken and hurled it at the Snake Man, saying, "I said fuckyou, or are you deaf now?" As every shuriken missed, the Sanin questioned, "Where are you aiming at, Sasuke?" As he completed some hand seals, the boy repeated, "This? Kaden. Ryuka no Jutsu, fire release. Dragon fire technique." When the Sanin realized that the incredibly thin wires that had been attached to the shuriken earlier were actually serving as a route for the flames to travel, his eyes widened. It wasn't good enough, but it was good the man realized his body was immobile just as he was about to use Kawarimi. He said, "What th?" as he noticed the final member of the team standing in the corner with a hand seal in his hand. "Genjutsu Shibari." As the Sanin dispelled the Genjutsu and Kawarimi just in time to avoid the flames, it appears that the Kurama also possesses the ability to fight. Illusionary binding technique. Standing next to Sasuke, Yakumo inquired, "Did we get him?" "No," the Uchiha said, drawing a kunai and forming a defensive stance behind Yakumo. Yakumo followed suit, both of them scanning the area for potential attacks or being taken aback when the Snake Man emerged from underground and kicked Sasuke and Yakumo apart. Yakumo started practicing hand seals and used every genjutsu and ninjutsu she knew to try to ward off the snake. Even her genjutsu-based Raiden and Kokwangyo no Jutsu were dismissed, and the snake gave her a backhand when she tried to approach the Uchiha. As she gripped her head, Yakumo heard, "Kon, I, L, L, Po, W." When she saw Sasuke attempting to battle the Sanin using taijutsu of all things, she thought, "No, not right now." After kicking Sasuke away, the Snake Man resumed his conversation. Yakumo saw that Sasuke was severely beaten and hardly conscious, but she was unable to hear exactly what he was saying. She knew she had to act as soon as Orochimaru extended his head. As she ran towards Sasuke, Yakumo used Kawarimi to channel chakra to her legs and change places with the Uchiha. With the searing pain of a seal being branded on her neck and the sensation of the man's fangs digging into her flesh, Yakumo let out a scream. Whether he has this Sharingan in the bag or not, Orochimaru grinned. His eyes grew wide when he realized it was the girl he had just bitten. He thought, where the hell is Sasuke? While ignoring Yakumo, who was now screaming in agony on the ground. He exclaimed, "Ah! There you are," as he saw Uchiha, who was now unconscious, lying on the ground a short distance away. All he could say was, "Now then," to put the say, as he had to leap back to avoid a wind blade that was coming his way. The snake ducked and spun around, kicking the blonde boy who exploded out of nowhere. "Kase no Yeba, blade of wind," he said. "Shit," he thought as he instantly made a Tsuchi Bunshin and sank underground, replacing himself with it. "Tisk," was Naruto's exclamation as he cut the Tsuchi Bunshin in two. Looking around, the blonde saw that both of his teammates were unconscious due to their injuries. The blonde asked, "A name more chakra, please, at least a tail's worth." His tenant graciously obliged, forming a red chakra cloak behind the blonde with one tail. Just as hundreds or even thousands of snakes were emerging from the ground, the blonde leapt up to a tree, inhaling. He sidestepped to avoid Orochimaru's punch. As he emerged from the tree, the man slithered away to avoid the fox-shaped fireball that the blonde shot at him after passing through some hand seals. As he kept examining the snake's body, Naruto thought, "Shit." The blonde thought, "You've been experimenting on your body too much," because he could only see a few spots on the snake man's body, despite seeing numerous lines along it. The blonde threw a kunai with an explosion tag at the snake man, thinking, "Can't go for the one-hit kill. He's too fast for me to even get in range and hit one of those." As the smoke from the explosive tag cleared, the snake remarked, "You're absolutely marvelous, Naruto-kun. If it wasn't for that fox, I would have loved to make you one of my possible vessels, well, at least after Sasuke." The snake man merely laughed when the blonde retorted, "You really do love little boys a tad bit too much, don't you, Orochi-teme?" As he burst into smoke and revealed himself to be a Kage Bunshin, Orochimaru said, "Joke all you want, Naruto-kun, but one thing is for certain: I won't leave until I bite Sasuke." The blonde wasn't particularly surprised because the real one had just emerged from underground, just a little in front of the blonde. The snake man screamed, "Gobyo Fuin, 5 elements seal," as purple flames gathered around his fingers. He lost his plan because he failed to notice the blonde's smirk. Orange flames appeared on the blonde's fingers as he said, "Gobyo Fuin Teiko, 5 elements seal counter." He put his arm out and let the snakes touch his fingers. As they were pushed apart, a glimmer of light appeared. The Sannin fell to his knees and screamed, "What did you do?" He was unable to control the property of his chakra, which was going crazy inside of him. The blonde, ignoring the now enraged Orochimaru, said as he headed to Yakumo, "Well, you did try to use a Fuinjutsu against an Uzumaki, so I just showed you who's better at the art." The blonde paused as he made a Kage Bunshin to tend to Sasuke while he lifted up Yakumo bridal style and deactivated his Magen. "Your chakra will be disrupted for the next day, so if you'd want to escape, I suggest you hurry up right now. As much as I want to go ahead and kill you while you're as harmless as a garden snake, my companions need medical attention first, and who knows," he said. He continued, "You might be useful to me in the future," with a tone of coldness that caused the Sannin's eyes to widen. "Don't tell me you're," the snake man said, staring at the genin with amazed eyes. Orochimaru, a familiar voice, approached them. "Tisk," was the snake Sannin's way of leaving the area. During his reunion with his former pupil, the snake remarked, "Interesting, you are very interesting, Uzumaki Naruto." After carrying Yakumo for a few more minutes, the blonde laid her down on the ground while examining her neck intently. When the blonde used his Dujutsu and noticed some malevolent lines and points along the seal, he exclaimed, "Ten no Juin, cursed seal of heaven." "Eiko ne. Yes, Naru-kun. Is it really possible for me to get right to the point without affecting Yakumo in any way? One method is to use Kaya Hoin, evil releasing method, to release the snake man's soul and then kill him, but before you can do that, you must use Shisho Fuin, 4-symbol seal, to place the snake man's soul in a vessel. Would an animal be adequate?" When Naruto noticed a tiny black snake slithering in the ground, he inquired. As Naruto created a clone to catch the snake, she said, "Yes, Naru-kun." As his clone brought him the snake, he thought, "Well, here goes nothing." After completing the required hand seals, Naruto placed his hand over the mark on Yakumo's neck. "Kaya Hoin," the blonde exclaimed as he extracted Orochimaru's soul from the seal, while his clone also started performing hand seals. "Shisho Fuin," the clone cried as he grasped Orochimaru's soul and sealed it inside the black snake. The snake's only response was, "What the he?" before a Tonto struck one of its body points, instantly killing it. Was Orochimaru truly killed by that? He questioned his renter. The man will not be killed, but he will be severely weakened because you killed a piece of his existence. The blonde looked at Yakumo and thought, good. As he combed her hair to the side of her face, he thought, sorry, I wasn't there to protect you. He put his chin under his hand and assumed a contemplative stance, thinking, well then I need to find an earth scroll, but I can't just leave them here. Behind the blonde came a voice that said, well look at we have here. When Naruto turned around, he saw an Iwa three-man team. The blonde merely grinned 5 days later, tower in the heart of Death's forest. Currently, a group of genins, including Naruto, Sasuke, and Yakumo, were ranged in front of the Hokage. Naruto graciously borrowed an earth scroll from the Iwa team, and after blessing their souls, he brought an unconscious Yakumo and Sasuke to the tower 5 days ago. Actually, they were the second team to reach the tower. The Ichibi's team was the only one to beat them when Sasuke finally awoke. The blonde informed him of what had transpired. Yakumo was still unconscious at the time, so the Uchiha was concerned for her and angry at the snake sage. Yakumo slept for 2 full days before waking up. Yakumo reassured her teammates right away after waking up that everything was alright. But Naruto saw that occasionally his friend and teammate would grab her head. She told him it was just a harmless migraine when he asked what it was about. If only he had known, he could have taken action. Naruto yawned as he observed the other genins that had made it through the previous section, which, in his opinion, mostly consisted of Konoha team's Kof-rigged Kof, Otto's team with the mummy, and Suna's team with the Ichibi. Speaking of Suna's team, the makeup artist was still ogling him. He mouthed out while glancing in the boy's direction. He said, I know I'm sexy, but stop checking me out, which infuriated the Suna nin and caused his sister to make fun of him. Simply shaking his head, Naruto turned back to face the elderly man who was still giving a speech about the will of fire. He was essentially ignoring it. Yes, he hardly noticed that Gekko Hayate had replaced the Sandaime, and he started to explain that there were too many people competing and that they would be holding a preliminary round or something. As different voices criticized this, said it was unfair, and so on, the blonde simply said nothing. He also noticed that the white-haired child from earlier had quit. The blonde thought, pansy, as he watched the boy go, or not, he thought, as he detected the man's slight snake odor. The blonde thought, well, I suppose that's why I get for not paying attention to those who I consider minor characters. First match Uchiha Sasuke versus Akato Yoroi, exclaimed Hayate, directing the remaining genins to the hall's upper floors. As Naruto watched the battle, the Yoroi guy essentially told Sasuke that he could absorb chakra by skin contact, and Naruto simply grinned. The Uchiha distanced himself from the man. Taking full advantage of that fact, then he used a fireball to kill the man. Winner. Uchiha Sasuke, was the statement made by Hayate, which caused Yamanaka Ino to squeal and yell like fans. Second match Aburame Shino versus Abumi Zaku. As he observed the match, Naruto scowled. Zaku talked too much, just like the other guy. Stopped talking and just spam the shit out of that pointless wind technique. We're ninjas for Kami's sake. He would have demonstrated to him the power of a genuine futon attack if he had been against this man Shane. Though, because Shino's insects caused the boy's arms to explode, negating the possibility that that would occur. Winner. Aburame Shino. Third match Yamanaka Ino versus Kurama Yakumo. Naruto was particularly interested in this one because he wanted to see how the heir of the renowned Yamanaka clan would handle a real kunoichi. Hayate exclaimed, Hajime, as the two fighters engaged in combat, if that's what you can call it. Ino threw shurikens at the Kurama heir, which the girl avoided, and declared, I'll beat you to impress Sasuke. Yakumo simply charged in and started using taijutsu to fight the girl, who shook her head every time she witnessed Naruto practicing his katas or engaging in combat with the Uchiha. She was reminded of her weakness when she discovered that she was actually outperforming Ino in it. She was taken aback. God. Yakumo threw another punch, this time striking the Yamanaka in the cheek and sending her rolling back, thinking, she sucks. In an attempt to incite her opponent, the Yamanaka heir asked, is that everything you got, you bitch? Yakumo ignored the cries of, damn you and your hipness, coming from the crowd and answered, did you say something? As she prepared to use her clan's signature ability, the Yamanaka remarked, well, then, it's time to end this. One Kurenai Yuhi from the crowds noticed what Ino was going to do, and her eyes widened. Naruto was not blind to this fact. She screamed, Shintenshin no Jutsu, mind-body switch technique, as her body went limp on the floor. 5 seconds later, Ino clutched her head against the floor and started screaming as she approached Ino. Yakumo simply shrugged and kicked her in the stomach, knocking her unconscious. Winner. Kurama Yakumo, was the statement Hayate made as Yakumo walked off stage and back to the audience. As Yakumo went by, the blonde remarked, "Good job." She took a few more steps before collapsing to her knees and clutching her head, saying, "Thank you, Uzumaki-san." Kurenai approached Yakumo just as Naruto was ready to ask her if she was alright, but he was interrupted. Naruto only uttered the word, "wa," before Kurenai and Yakumo disappeared through Shunshin. The blonde looked at Kakashi and Sasuke, who shrugged, unsure of what had happened. What was that about? He asked. Kakashi did have an idea, but he didn't want to share it with the genins because the time wasn't right. Fourth match. Uzumaki Naruto vs Inuzuka Kiba, was the announcement made by Hayate as the blonde heard a loud "Yahoo!" from the side. The words, "Good luck, Naruto," came from his sensei and teammate as he leapt into the arena. When Kiba felt a hand on his shoulder, he and his partner Akamaru decided to stop their journey to the arena. As he turned around, Inuzuka noticed Shino, a teammate, clutching his shoulder. The man said icily, "You should give up," which made Kiba growl. Kiba scowled at his teammate and exclaimed, "Why? I'm better than that Teme." Shino managed to say only, "You will lose," before Kiba turned away and proceeded to the stage. Their third teammate gasped when Shino added, "He might kill you." In defense of the blonde, Hinata remarked, "Naru-kun won't kill him." The Aburame was aware of this. One of his bugs witnessed Naruto's confrontation with the Iwa Nins, and it was not a pleasant scene. Kiba cockily declared, "Ready to lose Baka," as he and Akamaru assumed their family taijutsu stance. Naruto simply glanced at Hayate. "You heard him, he's ready to lose," the blonde said, causing the proctor to perspire as he gave the all-clear to start the match. The blonde countered with a kick to the dog's face, pushing him back, after the Inuzuka lunged forward and threw a punch that he slackly blocked. The blonde's comment, "Huh? You really are all bark and no bite," infuriated the Inuzuka, who then charged forward once more. As he kicked Akamaru away, the blonde remarked, "This is getting in the way." As he turned to face the blonde, "Suga, passing Fang," Kiba exclaimed, "Grr." The blonde watched the attack. It was slower than Orochimaru, slower than that girl in the waves months ago. Was that the experience of being weak? He thought as he reached forward with his left arm and caught the spinning Inuzuka's head. The blonde's actions startled Kiba, but he was quickly startled out of his reverie when his face struck the sidewalk. The blonde's strength caused his entire body to spring off the ground when he noticed a foot directly in front of his face. His half-lidded eyes widened. He was sent crashing into the arena wall directly next to Akamaru, and all he could think was, "Shit." The blonde's display of power shocked every ninja except Shino, Team 7, Kakashi, and the Hokage. They were aware that he was the year's rookie and had some strength, but this was crazy. The older ninjas believed that he was simply lucky or that the Kyuubi was the source of his strength, but this dispelled all of their doubts because they saw a boy who was incredibly strong and full of potential, and they were happy to have him on their side. Even though Sasuke had more common sense to try to fight the blonde now, the younger ones, a raccoon, a Hyuga, and Guy Jr., did not want to do so anytime soon. The blonde asked, "Is that all?" as he remained in the same spot. The Inuzuka said, "No way, you doby," as he rose slowly. The blonde said, "Tell you what, Kiba, make me move from this spot and I'll give up the match," which caused the genins who were watching to murmur. "Kiba, take the deal," Shino reflected, "No way in hell." As he watched Kiba take a food pill and give one to Akamaru, the blonde said casually, "Well, if you say so." As Akamaru stood on top of him, Kiba said, "Shikyaku no Jutsu, 4 legs technique," and went to his knees as Akamaru changed into another Kiba. Kiba uttered the words, "Jujin Bushin, beast human clone." Kiba and his partner began spinning at high speeds as he yelled, "Gatsuga, Fang passing Fang." Naruto watched as the attack struck the neighborhood with enough force to shatter the concrete. "Well, can you tell if he is observing, ne?" "Yes, he is in one of the viewing rooms on the 2nd floor." "Ne, thank you as always, no issue, Naru-kun." As a tiny orb of concentrated chakra started to form around his hand, Naruto slackly placed it to his side, palm facing the sky, thinking, "Well, time to show that stupid perv that I learned this technique so he'll teach me some new stuff." As he heard gasps coming from all over the room, especially from Kakashi and Sarutobi, the blonde grinned. An elderly man with spiky white hair, dressed in a green kimono, a red coat, Geta sandals, and a headband bearing the kanji for oil, grinned in the 2nd floor room. I give you vague instructions and you manage to recreate it, you really are Minato's son. Rasengan, spiraling sphere. Naruto uttered as he used the A-rank jutsu to confront the two spinning fangs that were approaching him. Before his body even struck the wall, the attack had already rendered the Inuzuka unconscious and sent him reeling back. Silence fell. It was unsettling. Uzumaki looked at Hayate and said, Proctor-san? As the blonde Shunshin returned to his spot next to a wide-eyed Kakashi and Sasuke, he declared, forgive me, winner. Uzumaki Naruto. What? He inquired. Kakashi said, you know what, I'm not even surprised, and shook his head. The blonde interrupted Sasuke as he was about to ask her to teach him. Sasuke turned his focus to the Jonin when Naruto said, I won't teach it to you, Sasuke, but I heard our sensei has a technique as strong as this one, have him teach you that. Fifth match, Sabaku no Kankuro vs Tsurugi Masumi. Naruto observed as the catboy killed the Konoha nin with his doll. Winner Sabaku no Kankuro. After saying, wow, and I thought you couldn't even get gayer, makeup, a black dress, and a doll? Naruto received a tick mark from Kankuro, who had to be restrained from attacking the boy by his Jonin sensei Baki. I feel bad for you, Naruto. Sixth match, Sabaku no Tamari vs Tenten. The weapon mistress got her hands on a basic wind jutsu. Winner. Sabaku no Tamari. With the exception of Yakumo, all of the recent Konoha kunoichi were of poor quality, and Naruto simply shook his head. Seventh match, Nara Shikamaru vs Tsuchikin. Naruto actually laughed during this match because Shikamaru's style of fighting was so typical of him, causing the girl to knock herself out after hitting her head against the wall. Yes, Shikamaru is a classic. Winner. Nara Shikamaru. 8th match. Hyuga Neji vs Hyuga Hinata. The one-sided battle made Naruto wince. Even the Hyuga heiress didn't deserve that kind of beating down, but he didn't care about her. Winner. Hyuga Neji. 9th match. Akamichi Choji vs Kinuta Dosu. Dosu just punched Choji after Naruto face-palmed him, that's all. Winner. Kinuta Dosu. Last match. Sabaku no Gaara vs Rock Lee. Naruto was paying close attention to this match as he studied the Ichibi Jinchuriki's skills. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he thought, interesting automated defense made of his sand, good for both offense and defense, but he lacks speed and is pretty much defenseless if that sand is taken out of the picture. As he watched Gaara crush the boy's left arm and leg to end the match, the blonde noticed that the boy was growing tired and thought, that guy in green isn't bad as well, he's fast as me, but his fighting style is too straightforward, he relies too much on his speed. Winner. Sabaku no Gaara. As everyone selected their numbers, Hayate said, now, to all the winners, please come back down here so you can draw from this box to see who you'll be fighting in the finals. As Naruto and Neji moved forward, the man said, okay, number 1 and 2, please step forward. First match, Uzumaki Naruto vs Hyuga Neji, 3 and 4. Second match, Aburame Shino vs Sabaku no Kankuro, 5 and 6. Third match, Sabaku no Tamari vs Nara Shikamaru, 7 and 8. Fourth match, Sabaku no Gaara vs Uchiha Sasuke. Last watch, Kinata Dosu vs Kurama Yakumo. You have 1 month to prepare for the finals, use your time appropriately, said the Hokage. With the exception of Naruto, who chose to remain there, all of the genins nodded as they consulted their senseis. When the man entered the room, the blonde said, so are you going to be willing to teach me for this past month, Ero Sennin? Yep, you really shocked me there, you mastered the Rasengan. How long did it take you to figure it out? Looking at the Gamma Sannin, the blonde said, a month. So are you going to be peeping or are we going to be training? Can't we do both? The boy simply shrugged and left the tower, with the Sannin following him a little. Exams Arena Chunin. A month has passed since the Chunin exams preliminary match, and spectators of all ages were crammed into the arena to watch the best genin in the country battle to the death for their amusement. While pacing the competitors' lounge, Sasuke asked, where is he? It's safe to say that the last Uchiha has grown stronger after training with Kakashi for the past month. He received some Kaden and Raiden jutsus from Kakashi, but it was his signature jutsu, Chidori, 1000 birds, that made the entire month worthwhile. He arrived at the arena a little early today in the hopes that his teammates would already be there after wrapping up his training with Kakashi the day before. Shikamaru said, calm down, Sasuke, as he emerged behind his fellow genin. I can't Nara, I mean Naruto's match will be starting in 1 minute, and I mean 1 minute, he said while pointing to the arena's middle. Don't tell me you don't see the Hyuga standing there in the middle. The way things are going, he's going to be disqualified. Shikamaru answered, why do you care? Won't that make it easier for you to win? The Nara gave the young Uchiha a typical Mendokusai response when he said, "No, that would defeat the purpose of all that training. I want to see how I measure up to him now." Within the arena, as he patiently awaited the start of the countdown, Neji remarked, "It seems that it is my fate today to win." Genma, the current proctor, rolled the senbon in his tongue and declared, "Uzumaki Naruto will be disqualified if he doesn't finish in the last 5 seconds. 3, 2. Neji grinned, believing he had won. 1, Genma said as a tornado of wind, lightning, and flames erupted inside the arena when it passed. One Uzumaki Naruto stood there, his clothes unaltered, his face marred by a chilly expression. "Good to see you have arrived in time, Uzumaki-san, but please come a bit earlier next time," said Genma. Naruto's response, "Sorry, I got lost in the road of life," forced nearly every Konoha shinobi to take responsibility. Konoha would have been massacred if Suna and Otto had attacked there. Neji said, "It appears you have arrived," and assumed the typical Hyuga fighting stance. "Nevertheless, you cannot escape your fate. You will lose here today." "And why is that Hyuga?" "Because F.A., the blonde interrupted him. "Fate, this fate, that blah blah blah, is that all you have to say, Baka Hyuga? Because I don't give a crap about you and your fate, but let me humor you with one truth: it is your fate to lose by my hands today, so no hard feelings," Naruto replied as he assumed his typical Shiryo posture. With chakra already encircling his fingers, the Hyuga activated his Byakugan and said, "Trust me. Fate is on my side." He was prepared to attack one of the blonde's Tenketsu points. To his surprise, though, the blonde trusted a knife hand that connected to his chest after his attacking hand was simply slapped away. However, the Hyuga stumbled backward and attempted to attack again, only to be sliced in the shoulder this time. As he dodged the Hyuga's attacks and dodged a blow meant for his chest, Naruto smirked and said, "So, when will fate help you win this fight?" He then kicked the Hyuga in the waist, causing his body to bend slightly in the path of the blonde's elbow, which struck the Hyuga in the cheek. The audience observed the Hyuga prodigy, who was well known for his exceptional taijutsu skills, being defeated in his forte. One girl with long black hair and the same white eyes said, "Otto-sama, I thought Neji Ni was a genius, so why is he getting beaten?" The Hyuga head responded, fuming deep inside, "Let this be a lesson to you Hanabi. There is always stronger people out there." Neji was meant to demonstrate the clan's strength, but now the Kyuubi brat was giving him the finger. If it weren't for the Kurama, they really ought to have killed the boy long ago. The blonde taunted the Hyuga, saying, "Come on Neji, faster, stronger, you won't even hit me at this rate." As the Hyuga assumed his Hake Rokuhuion show stance, he observed. The blonde merely grinned. The blonde said, "You better make this attack worth it, Neji," as he stood up and gestured toward me with his left arm outstretched. Neji cried out, "Hake Rokuhuion show," as he began with 2 strikes in a row, then 2 more, then 4 more, then 8, 16, and 31. Just as he was ready to move for the 32nd strike and complete the attack, he saw the blonde's hand reach out and place it on top of his head. Neji simply stared while the boy in front of him grinned smugly. Then he heard the words, "Kodai Fuinjutsu. Manajoroshi, ancient sealing technique. Mystic Eye Killer," which would determine his fate in this match. The Hyuga let out an agonized, "Ah," before he was sent hurtling off when a foot struck his face. "What the hell did you do?" Neji glared at the man in front of him while gritting his teeth in agony. The audience gasped in surprise as Naruto casually responded, "Simple, I sealed up your Byakugan. Set the seal free. Return my eyes to me." As he stood up, Neji said. Naruto punched the Hyuga in the face and remarked, "Your eyes mean nothing to me. Is that it? Then you demonstrated that it was your destiny, not mine, to lose here today." The Hyuga said, "No," and stood up. "You already lost the use of your eyes, you know no ninjutsu, and your skills with kunais and shurikens are subpar. Now tell me, Hyuga, whose loss today was it?" As Neji rushed in and leapt in the direction of the Uzumaki, Naruto inquired. "Nanaya ken dai ugi. Hachiretsu, 8 column, Naruto said as he struck the Hyuga in the chest with a palm strike with his right hand, then punched the airborne Neji with his left hand before leaping up in the air and kneeing him in the chin. As soon as he landed, he struck the Hyuga in the chest again with a palm strike with his right hand, then again with his 2 hands, cutting him in his sides and cracking a few of his ribs. Finally, Naruto leapt up and delivered an axe kick that could have killed the Hyuga if he had aimed for the head, but instead he struck the shoulder, sending the prodigy crashing hard into the ground. "Living barely was also your destiny." As the Hyuga passed out, Naruto muttered, "Because fate was capricious today." Winner of the match, Uzumaki Naruto. Genma declared as the crowd applauded and the boy reappeared next to Kakashi and Sasuke after he had shunned shot. Kakashi grinned and said, "Good job, Naruto. It seems that training with Jiraiya-sama did you good." The blonde nodded in agreement. "Where is Yakumo?" The blonde looked around and asked. Sasuke's words caused the blonde's eyes to widen. "Naruto. She was disqualified from the exams and placed in a momentary leave. Apparently it was under the recommendation of the third Hokage himself." "What?" According to Kakashi, "We only know it's because of some health issues." As he watched the next match with his sensei and teammate, Naruto responded, "I better visit her after this exam then." Seats for cage boxes. A man in cage robes covering his face and a hat with the symbol of wind on it said, "That young one is certainly interesting, quite powerful for someone his age." "He definitely is," said Sarutobi. "So, are you giving him a promotion to Chunin?" the cage in the mask inquired. The Hokage's response caused the cage to narrow his eyes. "Normally, yes, but due to certain circumstances, I cannot promote him." Looking back into the arena, he thought, so much wasted potential in a stupid village like this. I'll try to invite Naru-kun to join my side after this war. He would make a useful tool. Returning to the arena, Genma declared, "Next match Aburame Shino vs Subaku no Kankuro." To the surprise of everyone in the arena, Kankuro declared, "I forfeit." When Naruto said, "Pussy," in the Kankuro earshot, the boy gritted his teeth because he was actually defeating the Uzumaki. Genma declared, "Winner by forfeit, Aburame Shino." Well then, next match, Sabaku no Tamari and Nara Shikamaru. Shikamaru uttered the words, "Mendokusai," as Tamari leapt into the arena. "Aiku," Naruto pointed to a specific location in the crowd and told Shikamaru, "Shikamaru is not a good idea." "Shit," was the Nara's response upon realizing his mother was observing. As he descended to the arena, Shikamaru remarked, "I guess I have to fight." He knew that Shikamaru's mind was his real weapon and that he would be a dangerous foe in the future, so he watched the great strategist at work as he avoided the fangirl's wind blades and eventually tricked and caught her using his Kagemain no Jutsu, shadow imitation technique. Shikamaru's next actions didn't really surprise him, but they still made him laugh, and he forfeited the match. Naruto simply grinned as he settled in. Shikamaru had already started idly making his way back up to the stands when Genma declared, "Winner by forfeit Sabaku no Tamari." Sasuke said, "Well, then it's time for the warm main event," as he and his opponent both shunned into the arena. Subaku no Gaara Hajime vs Uchiha Sasuke. Genma cried out as he retreated a single step, narrowly avoiding a sand attack from the red-headed genin. "Uchiha, your mother wants your blood." Gaara let out a scream as he launched an assault using his sands in an effort to seize the Uchiha and crush him. The sand boy's attacks were too predictable, so Sasuke smirked as he began to backflip away. He only needed a good shot of one of his fire jutsus to turn that sand to glass, then one Chidori, and he was the winner. Too slow, was Sasuke's attempt to incite his opponent as he threw some explosive tagged kunais at the boy. Knowing that the smoke they would produce would provide him with the opening he needed, and the sand converged in the direction of the explosive kunais as he had predicted. As he started looking through some hand seals, Sasuke thought, "Now." Sasuke uttered the words, "Kaden. Karyu Dai Enden, Fire Release. Fire Dragon Great Flame Bullet," as he expelled several enormous fire dragons in the direction of Gaara. As he moved his arms forward and ordered the sand to rise to block the incoming flames, Gaara simply gazed at the flames without emotion. As he completed the required hand seals, Sasuke thought, "Just as planned, Chidori," he said, his left hand covered in lighting. As his sand turned to a molten mush from the heat of Sasuke's jutsu, he began to run towards Gaara, barely giving the boy time to react. Gaara didn't have time to summon more sand, so he jumped to the side in the hopes of avoiding the full force of the attack. As soon as he saw what was going to happen, whether it was madness or not, he wasn't going to let himself be killed. "Chidori." Before the boy could conjure up more sand, Sasuke let out another scream and thrust his arm forward, striking Gaara in the shoulder. "Tisk," was Sasuke's response as he cancelled his jutsu and moved away to avoid the Jinchuriki's sand. As she tried to think of another strategy, Sasuke thought, "That was my best shot of winning. Your blood, Uchiha, will be mine." As he eventually collected some sand, a dome appeared over him, and Gaara uttered those words. "I can use Chidori at least 2 more times, so I guess I'll go with that plan," said Sasuke. Grinning at the dome, the Uchiha ran to the opposite side of the arena, Giving him enough room to carry out his plan, he took something out of his pouch and put it in his right hand as he started going through some hand seals once more. Chidori. With his left hand covered in lightning, the Uchiha uttered those words Sasuke then dashed in the direction of the sand dome, dodging all of the Suna shuriken, sand shuriken, that the sand dome threw at him. Ahaha! When his left hand pierced the sand dome, the Uchiha screamed out and opened his right palm to reveal a kunai with an explosion tag. He threw the kunai in the hole his Chidori had made before it closed up, and he smiled knowing he had hit the boy because he felt the warmth of blood all over his hand. The Uchiha uttered the word Katsu as the sand dome fell, exposing a bleeding and severely wounded Gaara. With his hand already gone and transformed into what appeared to be a sand-shaped claw, Gaara let out a painful scream as the sand began to layer inside his body. Well, as he watched the match, Naruto remarked, "This is getting interesting," but he scowled when he saw dozens of feathers falling from the sky. As he dispelled the genjutsu and channeled Aiko's power, he thought, shit. Boom! When Naruto heard a loud explosion, he looked up to see a 4-point barrier had been set up in place of the Hokage box. When Naruto opened his tanto and saw hundreds of Oto and Sunanin attacking the ninjas of Konoha, he instinctively ducked before spinning around and stabbing an Oto nin in the heart, thinking, so Orochi Teme is starting his invasion, huh? Naruto used Sensa and appeared directly between 3 Oto nins, saying, well, better get to work. He slit the man's throat to swiftly kill him. He killed the second by thrusting a knife hand into his chest. In order to kill the final one, he leapt and delivered a roundhouse kick, snapping the man's neck. When Naruto turned to face the arena, he saw Temari and Kankuro grabbing Gaara and fleeing. Then he saw Sasuke rise and follow them as he killed another group of Oto nin by channeling wind chakra in his tanto. He asked himself, should I chase after them? Kakashi said, Naruto, as he materialized next to the genin. He only managed to say, chase after Sasu, before Naruto nodded and vanished. Hold on, bring a team, Tisk, Kakashi said, but he caught a glimpse of Shino slowly rising from his chair. The copy nin said, Shino, I have an A-rank mission for you, and hurled a kunai at a Suna nin, killing him by striking him in the forehead. Kakashi gave the young Aburame his mission, and he nodded. Alongside Naruto, and another one bites the dust, was Naruto's statement after he killed another Oto nin by using his tanto to stab the man in the forehead. He said, and another one bites, while quickly dividing a Suna nin and 2 other Oto nin with a K's no Yaiba, blade of wind. Naruto exhaled a ball of fire that burned a hiding Suna nin who was attempting to ambush the blonde. Another one bites the dust, was his final statement. Where in hell did that originate? As he accelerated, Naruto pondered. When he saw a huge snake and a giant toad appear out of nowhere on top of the snake, he thought, more catching up, less killing. When he finally noticed someone waiting for him motionless, the blonde remarked, looks like Gamma Sennin has finally recovered from the beating I gave him yesterday. When he stopped, the blonde grinned and said, well, if it's not Mr. Clown, will you show me any of your doll tricks? As Kankuro produced his puppet Karasu, the blonde asked smugly. Kankuro positioned the puppet in front of him and remarked, I've been waiting to do this. Naruto only uttered the words, I haven't cause you're weak, as he leapt to the side to avoid a bunch of poisoned senbon that was emerging from the puppet's mouth. Naruto said, do you know why you can never win against me, makeup boy? As he leapt from tree to avoid the puppet's charges and projectiles. As Naruto directed his chakra to his legs and briefly activated his Magen, he said, it's because, while flawlessly observing all of the puppeteer's chakra strings. As he pushed off a tree in the direction of the puppet, Naruto remarked, you're weak. He then cut off all of Kankuru's chakra strings, causing the puppet to collapse to the ground. The blonde then kneed the boy in the stomach and then extended it into a kick that lifted him off the ground by kicking him in the chin before jumping and kicking him into a tree. Let this be a lesson to you. Always have something better up your sleeve, the blonde said as Naruto landed in front of the startled puppeteer. Naruto said, well then, as he felt some chakra signatures suddenly come toward him. Is a group of genins being sent for this? As he saw another group of chakras converge close to the smaller group, he remarked, Kakashi must have gone insane. Knowing that none of the members of the group had yet to receive their first kill, he said, they're ninja. It's about time they grew up and learned the harsh reality of our business. Naruto simply shrugged and carried on pursuing Sasuke. Inside the 4 corners barrier, Orochimaru uttered the words, Kachiyose, Edo Tensai, summoning. Impure world reincarnation. after successfully calling forth the Shoden and Neodaime Hokage. Sarutobi looked in disbelief at what Orochimaru had done and said, "Sensei." The Snake Man did the same to the Neodaime, causing both cages to lose their emotions and become complete puppets to the Sanin's will. "Saru, it's go." Orochimaru interrupted the Shodai's speech by implanting a kunai with a complex seal written on it in his head. Orochimaru looked at the elderly cage and uttered the words, "You are going to die and lose here, Sensei." "That may be the case, but Konoha's future will still be brightly lit by the will of fire even if I die." "What future?" Orochimaru looked at his sensei and said, "I was here in your Genin test, and the only future I see is Team 7. I do believe we were Team 7 back then as well, Sensei, and look how we turned out. One remains loyal to the village but is a pervert, one left the village not wanting to return, and lastly yours truly who left the village and vows to destroy it." The Sandaime squinted at his pupil and asked, "What is your point, Orochimaru?" "Well, I'll say that this 7th team is doing what its predecessors did. One will remain faithful to the village. One will depart and never return. And one will depart and swear to demolish it." "What do you mean all of them are per? You must be an elderly, senile man. Haha. The Uzumaki will depart and return to demolish this location. The Kurama heir remains, and the Uchiha departs to join me." "There's no way Naruto would do that. He loves this village," the Hokage said with a laugh. As the two Hokages attacked, Orochimaru simply sighed and palmed his face, saying, "You really are senile." Returning to Naruto, Naruto saw an unconscious Temari after a few more minutes of running, and he grinned because he knew that since he was so close to Gaara, he really needed to reason with her. Naruto exclaimed, "There we go," when he saw Gaara, who appeared to be a miniature Shukuku, pinning the Uchiha to a tree with one hand. Entry in dynamic. As he entered the scene, Naruto screamed out and kicked the partially transformed Gaara in the face, forcing him to release Sasuke. He then swiftly created a clone and had it lead Sasuke in the direction of the Konoha Genins who were still pursuing them. Uzumaki. When Gaara noticed Naruto standing a few feet ahead of him atop a tree branch, he let out a half-crazed scream. "Your blood is what Mom wants." In an attempt to crush the blonde to death, the boy hurled a massive wave of sand in his direction. As the wave passed, Naruto channeled a lot of chakra from his feet to propel himself from the top of the tree and land directly next to Gaara. Naruto remained silent the entire time he ran towards the top of the tree, dodging the wave. "Take a snap out of it," before delivering a knife to the boy's stomach. The blonde said this while punching Gaara 3 times in the face. "Gah!" As he glared at the blonde, Gaara let out a scream. Why don't you donate your blood to your mother?" He thought he had the upper hand, but as he rushed in again, forcing the blonde to go on the defensive, he realized that all of his attacks were either missing or barely avoided, while all of the blonde's counterattacks were spot on. Gaara smirked as he grabbed the blonde by the leg, but the smirk was quickly erased as the clone started glowing before exploding, and he gritted his teeth in frustration as he sent his enormous claw-like arm towards the blonde in an attempt to grab a hold of him and crush him. "Ugh!" Gaara exclaimed as he stumbled backward and was startled to see 7 more clones land on top of him before blowing up. Naruto observed what transpired from atop a tree and remarked, "Damn, you have to love that technique." To get Naruto's attention, Eiko remarked, "It's easy to use ammunition for someone with huge chakra reserves like you, Naru-kun, but for others, well, they're not that lucky." "Well, you're probably correct. Oh, you had better take a close look at Ichibi, Naru-kun. Why haven't I owned him enough, I wonder?" "No, Shikaku is already standing behind you in all his glory, and the boy just used a jutsu to fall asleep while you were preoccupied." "Wah!" the blonde said, barely having time to use Kawarimi before a giant Shukaku crushed her. "Why did you divert my attention, Eiko ne? Because this chapter doesn't have many lines for me to say." "WTF? Exactly." With a shake of his head, Naruto turned back to the current issue. He was sweating because his tenant, Ine, was occasionally just plain strange. The Biju roared, "I'm free," and started to swoop down, launching wind balls everywhere. "All right, so how do we handle this? I can't use them to try to pin him down so I can beat the living daylights out of Gaara because there is no summon. I suppose I'll choose that." As he started to form a spiraling sphere of fire red in his hand, the blonde spoke. With Orochimaru and Sarutobi, the Sandaime uttered the words, "Shiki Fujin, dead demon consuming seal," as his clones defeated Neodaime and Shoden. "No." As Sarutobi attempted to extract the snake's soul, Orochimaru uttered those words. A few feet from them, Orochimaru glanced at his sword. As the sword levitated, Orochimaru said, Kusanagi no Tsurugi. Ku no Tachi. Grass-cutting sword. Longsword of the sky. And motioned with his fingers for it to come and impale Sarutobi. Enma, Sarutobi's personal monkey summon, grabbed it before it could kill him after impaling him thoroughly. Orochimaru thought, fuck, as his soul began to slowly be drawn out. Alongside Naruto as he observed the insane Shukaku destroying everything with futon. Renkuden, wind style. Drilling air bullet. The blonde simply kept grinning. Bigger as the sphere in his hand grew larger and brighter, the blonde uttered the words, stronger. As he directed chakra to his legs and vanished using sensa to approach one of the beast's legs, Naruto remarked, just right. Kaiten. Odama Goen Rasengan, fire release. Big ball great flame spiraling sphere. As he struck the Ichibi's leg, causing it to screech and causing the enormous Biju to stagger, Naruto let out a scream. Now, was Naruto's statement as he produced 10 clones, each of whom started to undergo hand seals. Before dispelling and launching the blonde Jinchuriki into the air, all of the clones let out a scream. Futon. Daitappa, wind release, great breakthrough. As he approached the still slumbering Gaara, Naruto continued to create clones in midair, which threw him upward. It's time to get up. When Naruto finally landed directly in front of the boy, he reacted swiftly, dodging the sand that was attempting to defend its master. Get up and shine. As his fist made contact with the Genin's face, waking him up and dispelling the Biju, Naruto let out a scream. No. I just left. Shukaku let out a scream as he began to disappear. Naruto thought, ah crap, as he and Gaara began to fall freely. Alongside Orochimaru, perish, elderly man, the snake uttered those words. Never. As the two struggled on, Sarutobi answered, not until I take you with me. Alongside Naruto lying down in the center of a broad, human-shaped crater was Naruto. When he saw Gaara, whose fall was cushioned by his sand, he thought, how the hell did I survive that? Because you were the protagonist, what? Nothing. Stupid weird voices in my head, is what Naruto said, and his tenant gave him a tick mark as he got up and approached the barely conscious Gaara. Please don't come nearer, please don't take my life. As he attempted, but was unable, to leave his position, Gaara let out a scream. The blonde simply continued to approach him before bending over and meeting the young Sunanin's eyes. I won't murder you. Even better, the boy grinned, reaching out to the redhead. I would like to become your friend, Naruto said, causing the boy's eyes to enlarge. Why? Gaara inquired. Because we're the same. He briefly broke his mask. Gaara saw those eyes, eyes full of loneliness, hate, and rage, eyes full of pain and sorrow. How? The blonde answered, I carry the Q while you carry the Ichi. Then it dawned on Gaara that the blonde was a Jinchuriki, just like him, a human being sacrificed for power by their village. Can I trust you to be my friend, then? To be on my side? The blonde said, one Jinchuriki to another? He reached out and shook the blonde's hand, but the redhead continued to stare, thinking, a friend. In the middle of an invasion, the two sacrifices shook hands. An alliance forged in conflict. Naruto grinned brightly and said, good? This was a friendship he intended to maintain. The boy understood his own suffering and would probably support him in difficult times. Gaara felt the same way, as there was at last someone who would accept him, give his life purpose, inspire trust, and not betray him like the others. Both of them thought, yeah, it's good to have someone who knows my pain. The blonde said, Gaara, go to sleep for the time being, I'll wake you up when the invasion is over. Why can't I sleep? Why? Every time I sleep, Shukaku takes over. The blonde said, could you show me your seal? He showed the blonde his seal and nodded, as if he was being overly trusting, but he didn't really care. As he examined the seal, Naruto said, don't worry, I won't do anything that may hurt you. Upon noticing the issue, he produced an orange flame on the tip of his index finger and started to work on the seal, repairing it. Naruto said, try sleeping now, while using a tiny sleeping genjutsu in silence. But, when Naruto said, trust me, the redhead nodded and slowly closed his eyes, falling asleep for the first time in years. Naruto declared, you can come out now, as Temari and Kankuro materialized behind him. It was, Gaara. That the two cried out. He got up and turned to face the two of them as they assumed their fighting positions. Despite their injuries, they both stood firm. The blonde said, don't worry, he's sleeping. He then gave the other two Sabaku siblings a close examination. Naruto said, take care of him, and turned to leave. "He's experienced too much, don't let him become like," the blonde said, but he quickly left the scene without saying anything more. Using the cages, "Get out of here, you jerk!" As the Shinigami severed his hands and took his teacher's soul, Orochimaru screamed out. "The plan is over. We must now depart," the Snake Sannin said, attracting his elite Sound Four's attention. As soon as they broke down the barrier, the four seized their master and fled. The Sannin simply gritted his teeth and felt his arms burn as if the Amaterasu had struck them. Nevertheless, as he bore the agony, he noticed something that caused his eyes to widen slightly. That blonde boy standing far away and staring straight at him as the boy's eyes locked with the snakes. One wanted to leave, while the other wanted to destroy the village. Before revealing it to be nothing more than a cage bunshin, the blonde simply waved and grinned at the Snake Sannin. Very interesting, Orochimaru thought before collapsing from the agony. Naruto is back a few meters from the spot where he and Gaara fought. Naruto reappeared in a clearing. "You look like shit," Naruto remarked, glancing at the severely battered Uchiha. "Shut up," was the only response from the Uchiha. As he waited for the Genin team, who had not yet arrived, Naruto simply shrugged. Before obtaining the information from his clone, he saw some Auto Nin and Suna Nin fleeing. The blonde remarked, "It appears that the invasion is at last over." Gazing up at the sky, he added, "And I still have to visit Yakumo. Guess that can wait until later, after 2 days." The day in the eerily silent village of Konoha was cloudy and dark. Konoha came together to grieve for the people who had died in the invasion. As though the weather were mirroring the different tumultuous emotions in each and every villagers of the now damaged village of Leaves, it began to rain. All but one of the many ninjas who died were deeply saddened by the loss of Sarutobi Hiruzen. While everyone was crying, one teenager stood there and gazed at the picture of the deceased Hokage. It was a straightforward image of a smiling old man who was gentle and kind, a father figure to his people, but he knew that this man was the main source of his pain. He was aware of the Kyuubi's 2 former containers and how their status was concealed. He was aware that the cage had called a shinobi council and informed them of his presence. He was aware that the man had deliberately instructed the Anbu to wait until his life was in jeopardy before acting. He was aware that the man intended to use him as a willing sacrifice to win the village's loyalty. He was aware that he knew better than anybody else. This old man was anything but gentle and kind. If the Sandaime was thankful for anything, it was that his actions created his abilities. The lone teenager closed his eyes. As he removed the seal, the teenager opened his eyes. He understood the value of life, the fragility of the world, and the force of death. He turned slowly and took one last close look at the photograph. The teenager said, icily, "Sayonara Sarutobi Hiruzen," and turned to leave. Several hours later, in the now empty Hokage office, 3 figures were seated opposite one another. Kaharu and Homura, the elders of Konoha, were seated on one side, while Jiraiya, the frog sage, was seated on the other. "Jiraiya, we want you to be the Godem Hokage," said Homura. The sage answered, "I can't, there is someone better to take the job." "Are you certain you're not interested in becoming Hokage? Once you miss this chance, we won't give it to you again," Kaharu inquired. "I'm completely sure, I will never take up that hat." "All right, so who do you believe is more qualified for the position?" Homura inquired. The sage's response was, "Senju Tsunade. She is a Senju, a direct descendant of the Shodem and Neodaime, as well as one of the Sannin and the greatest medical nin in existence," said Jiraiya. "And how will you persuade her to return to Konoha?" Kaharu inquired. "Simple, I'll just need Uzumaki Naruto to come with me and I'll be able to convince her." "What? That brat from hell? Why?" The sage glared at Homura as he said that. Repeating that in mind, "Why is his presence necessary for you?" In an attempt to steer the conversation back on course, Kaharu asked. As the 3 continued their conversation, the Sannin stated, "Believe me, I think he's the key to bring her back to Konoha." The following day, as he made his way to the Kurama compound, Naruto sighed. The last few days had been busy for the young Uzumaki, who had been compelled by Kakashi to assist with the village's reconstruction. He had intended to visit Yakumo 3 days prior, but the invasion, construction, and mourning caused the visit to be postponed. Speaking of mourning, Naruto was also troubled by Yakumo's absence from the memorial. Whatever it is that she must have, it must be very serious for her to miss something that nearly everyone in Konoha attended. When Naruto finally came to a stop at the Kurama compound's front gates, he saw one of the 2 guards there and asked if he could go speak with Yakumo. The man told him to wait outside and Naruto entered the compound. After a few minutes, the guard returned with an elderly man. Naruto thought, shit, because he knew the man well. He was Kurama Unkai, Yakumo's uncle. And he had heard from Yakumo that the man wanted to kill her, which put the man at the top of his list of people he didn't like. Greetings, Naruto Uzumaki, what has brought you here? Looking at Naruto, Unkai posed the question. Naruto answered, I heard Yakumo was ill, so I'm here to visit her. You may go in to see her, however keep it short, she needs time to recover. As the Kurama motioned for one of the guards to lead the way, Naruto simply nodded. The guard led the blonde in front of Yakumo's room and said to Naruto, we're here. The guard stood next to the door and said, just call if you need anything. Naruto knocked first, then opened the door and entered, saying, thanks. Naruto surveyed the room, which had not changed much since his last visit. It was still a plain room with a bed, a desk that held the mask she had purchased a few days prior, a shelf containing a variety of scrolls, and, lastly, a variety of art supplies strewn about. The words, hello Uzumaki-san, caught Naruto's attention and caused him to turn to face the bed. Hello Kumo-san, was his response. Yakumo Pav. Just a short while ago I let out a cry of, "R," as the pain hit me again. The voice repeated, kill you know you want to kill, as I gripped my head and began to roll around the bed. I don't really know what it is, but it just started talking to me and telling me to kill, and every time the voice said that, it hurt. Who are you? What are you? I asked. It hurts a lot. I feel like I've been struck in the head 100 times. It hurts a lot. You want to kill me since I am you. I don't want to kill, so you can't be me. You know why you want to kill, you know why you want to kill, remember why you want to kill, remember why you want to kill. I gripped my head even more tightly because this voice hurt me so much I wanted to cry, but I made a self-promise to never cry again. I promised him that I would never cry again. You wish to murder killed parents. I heard the voice say something about my parents, and I thought, huh? You want to kill because you want to kill your parents, remember. As I started to recall a scene from the past, I thought, My eyes widened and I said, no, kill those who cause pain. I repeated, no, after realizing what the voice was requesting. We're here, was the voice I heard outside my room. The voice repeated, just call if you need anything. I widened my eyes when I heard a familiar voice say, thanks. As soon as I straightened up and tried to block out the voices in my head, I thought, Uzumaki-san is here. Then, there was a knock before the door opened. His blonde hair, cerulean blue eyes, and adorable facial whiskers made me smile as I watched him survey the room. The voice grew louder, but I chose to ignore it. I said, hello Uzumaki-san, to get the blonde's attention. Hello Kumo-san, was his response, which made me laugh inwardly because he had a fondness for calling people by their nicknames. How can I assist you? I questioned him. Well, I've heard about what transpired. Have you recovered? The boy inquired. Uzumaki-san, what do you mean? I heard from Inu-san that you had some medical condition that made you miss the finals. Yes, indeed you shouldn't worry about it, Uzumaki-san. I haven't been feeling well for a while and it might just be a seasonal flu. I never had AFLU, I answered, yes, because idiots don't catch them. The blonde simply laughed heartily. How did you perform on the test, then? I kicked a Hyuga's ass before the invasion started, and from the looks of things me and Sasuke are probably going to be promoted to Chunins. The two of them were leaving me behind, so I smiled and said, that's good to hear, even though I was secretly a little sad. Like your parents, they will depart. Kill pain caused by kill. I tried not to show Uzumaki how hurt I was, thinking, shut up. Are you alright? As he approached my bed and leaned in, the blonde asked. I'm fine. Thank you for asking, Uzumaki-san. Are you certain? The blonde said this as he leaned his whole body into my bed, drawing nearer and nearer until his forehead and face were only a few inches apart. The boldness and sense of intimacy that the blonde is displaying made me flush. He was only a few inches from his lips. The blonde leaned back and remarked, you don't seem to have a fever. I made an effort to conceal my blush. Stupid blondes, I thought, deciding to give him a little teasing. Oh my, pretty straightforward today, Uzumaki-san. What? The blonde answered. The blonde's eyes widened as I teased, it's just you and me, in this room. I'm sick and defenseless and you're in my bed. I said in a sensual voice, just please be gentle today, averting my eyes to conceal the smile on my face. The blonde must have leapt a few feet away because I heard a loud thud. I caught him blushing out of the corner of my eye. He was adorable, Kill, he is an excellent friend. Kill, I adore him. Kill, I genuinely. Kill, you, I uttered while gripping my head. How are you? As he gripped my shoulders, I heard the blonde say. I'm okay, was my response, but I wasn't. The words grew louder and the pain increased, but now that he was here, it got worse. I must remain resilient. I grinned at Uzumaki-san and said, everything is fine. He only said, "Ido," as a cloud of smoke engulfed the room. What? As I glanced at the source, I noticed a tiny orange frog standing in the center. Are you Naruto? The frog said. Glancing at me, I gestured to the blonde and simply shook my head. Are you Naruto? The blonde was asked by the frog. Indeed, what is Jiraiya's desire? The frog took out a scroll and handed it to the blonde, saying, he asked me to give you this. The frog declared, mission complete, before disappearing. As I noticed Uzumaki gazing at the still-closed scroll, I thought, weird. The blonde nodded as he opened the scroll and began reading it. If you'd like, you can read it here. I won't mind, I said. The blonde sighed loudly, and I heard it. A trip? I inquired. The blonde said, yeah, with the frog pervert, while he set the scroll on fire. I don't appreciate you burning stuff in my room. The blonde scratched the back of his head and apologized. When must you depart? Right now, I said, you can go. Naruto said, in a tone he doesn't often use, I'm sorry that I have to leave so soon, but I hope you get. After the blonde gave him a pitiful smile. I've only heard him use that tone a few times, and it was one of warmth and concern. Anyo, are you okay? There, let it all out there? Call me Naruto. As he walked out of my room, he glanced at his retrenchment and I grinned. My first friend was him. I heard, kill, again as the pain began to flare up. My best friend was him, the voice said, kill, which made the pain worse. He was a member of my team, kill, it said, as the agony only grew worse. I had a crush on him, the voice said, kill, as the pain intensified to new levels of agony. It was he that I, kill, I heard it say once more. Love the first closed my eyes and fainted from the agony, saying, Naruto. On his way to the main gates, Naruto headed to the street of Konoha to meet Jiraiya, the one and only super pervert he encountered. Shikamaru and the Uchiha, who had been promoted by the council to Chunin. On his way to the gates, Shikamaru informed him that they and a few other genins were going on a mission before leaving them. Naruto gave them a nod and wished them luck, but it wasn't as if he gave a damn if any of them died. The old pervert exclaimed, so you're finally here, as he leapt from the village gates. Naruto's response, hey Ero Sennin, caused the pervert to trip and plant his face. Naruto folded his arms across his chest and said, so you just told me we had a mission, what exactly are we doing? Jiraiya responded, pushing himself off the ground, we're going to find my old teammate Tsunade. She's going to be the new Hokage, he added. New cage, huh? Naruto asked, recalling what he had previously read about Tsunade. Sadly, aside from the woman's proficiency in medical jutsu, he wasn't particularly impressed. Despite her advanced age, the old man was obviously very excited for this mission, so the Sannin asked, aren't you excited? Naruto said, not really, as he began to leave the gates, Jiraiya following closely behind. Where are we going anyway? He asked. Tanzaku Town, the elderly man said, quickening his pace to keep up with the genins. Satsujin. A killer's birth. After settling down on a bed, Naruto let out a sigh. He mumbled, stupid Jiraiya and his perverseness. To be honest, the man would have been a lecherous old pervert who would have been put in jail long ago if he hadn't been so powerful. Naruto got out of bed and said, ne, you feel that? His tenant replied, yeah, 2 high chakra levels, one comparable to a Biju and the other quite familiar. Naruto turned his attention to the door and waited for a knock. Moving toward the door, he used his right hand to open it while using his left to channel chakra. He grinned upon seeing a familiar face in a black cloak with red clouds and a high collar. Hello Weasel-san, he said, holding his tanto in his left hand. With a faint smile that disappeared almost immediately, the man said, hello Naru-kun, I see you've been taking care of my tanto. I would like you to come with us. As he prepared to face the 2 S-rank missing nin, Naruto asked no one in particular, Hoshigaki Kisame and S-rank missing nin from Kiriha? The blonde said, it really has been useful Weasel-san, as he stood his ground and turned to face the other person. Kisame chuckled as he put his hand on his blade, saying, hey, look at the Gaki, Itachi thinks he can use that sword. Come on over, hurry up, before I cut off a leg or two. Since the hallway was a better place for him to try and fend off the 2, or, based on the way things were going, fend off Kisame. Naruto simply looked at him impassively as he stepped out of the room and dropped a smoke bomb, covering the blonde as he went. As he had anticipated, Kisame charged in and began slashing with his enormous sword. Naruto scowled because he was being significantly undervalued based on the missing nin's careless swings as the monster of the mist. He was demonstrating his worthiness for the title, so it's not like the man had no right to undervalue him as Kisame viciously swung his sword around. Naruto continued to dodge as best he could, only suffering minor cuts. He intended to take advantage of the fact that he was being undervalued by a clearly superior adversary. As he persisted in his attack, Kisame remarked, "Looks like Gaki can dodge." Even though he wasn't trying very hard, his attacks were sufficient to render an experienced Chunin incompetent. Despite being gradually pushed into a corner, Naruto maintained a composed expression and answered, "Yes, I am quite confident in my dodging skills. You could say I spend a lot of my time learning how to do so," he said. "You bet now, Naru-kun. Kick his ass," Eiko applauded with pride. Naruto continued to be defensive while channeling chakra into his body in an attempt to trick Kisame into thinking he was nothing special. "Come on Gaki, don't tell me this is all that you got." Kisame grumbled as he swung his sword horizontally, making Naruto leap back to avoid losing a significant portion of his chest. It worked like a charm. Before launching a tiny fireball at the missing nin, Naruto practiced hand seals while avoiding contact with Kisame as he swung his sword at it and caused it to absorb the chakra-based attack. Kisame simply grinned. "That all Gaki? That wasn't even enough to get Samahata going?" As his back struck a wall and he found himself cornered, Naruto spat out, "Tisk," in an attempt to appear irate. Excellent, unaware that the blonde had closed his eyes, Kisame raised his sword and swung it down, saying, "Well, that was fun while it lasted Gaki, but there's nowhere to run now." Uchiha Itachi was passively observing. Kisame Hoshigaki was grinning. Naruto Uzumaki was beaming so broadly that it seemed to be tearing his face in two. Then his eyes opened again, the world grew brittle. Before turning his attention to the scaly sword, Naruto's eyes darted around, taking in all the lines and points surrounding the missing nin's body. Naruto took one step to the side, channeling as much chakra into his arms and legs as he could, even drawing on Eiko's chakra. Although it was already impossible to avoid this swing in time, the damage could still be reduced. The blade's sharp scales scraped against the young shinobi's left shoulder, making him grit his teeth. Then, as he kicked off the ground, Naruto tightened his hold on his tanto and trusted his blade into the Samahata sword with a high degree of practiced accuracy. His intended victim? However, the sword has a simple black point. Before the sword burst into a rupture of now grayed scales, it gave an ungodly shriek. Kisami's smirk was erased from his face, and Itachi's eyes grew wide. Naruto hurried over to Kisame, who was already leaping back to Itachi's eyes. While pumping more chakra into his legs, the man still had the reflex of an S-rank missing nin, and he wasn't an S-rank missing nin for nothing since Naruto had no clear shots on any of his body points. His little action undoubtedly prevented his death from being ended there and then. He was still able to maim the man, though recalling a technique he had learned and successfully copied years before. Naruto grinned to himself. The teenager mumbled out a move that Sarutobi Asuma Hine made famous in Konoha, as wind chakra covered his tanto, extending its reach just long enough to reach its target, the missing nin's left arm forming a tiny line. "AAARRRGGGGHHHHH," Kisame cried in agony as he landed next to Itachi, gripping what was left of his left hand. Naruto calmly resealed his tanto and turned away from the two missing nins, saying, "I think it's quite appropriate to throw in a pun or two about you being disarmed, but it seems our small battle is drawing to a close." The fight was already over. With anger impairing his judgment, Kisame snarled, "Fuck you Gaki. I'm going to kill you." He chose to charge at the blonde without a sword or jutsu, ready to punch her to death if necessary. His sudden outburst of rage caused the missing nin to miss a few things, including his partner's wide eyes as she tried to reach for him. Too appeared out of nowhere as a flash of red and white. The blonde's broad grin read, "Free. Rasengan." The Sanin's booming voice reverberated through the corridor as the missing nin's chest collided with the tiny sphere of destruction he was holding. The air was filled with a loud cracking sound as Kisami's sternum and ribs cracked under the pressure of the attack, causing his chest to collapse as the different bone fragments scattered and ruined his heart and lungs. Kisami's life was gradually fading away when he was sent spiraling towards the other end of the wall. The last thing he saw was the Jinchuriki's calculating, cold eyes staring at him, along with that tiny, savage smile on the teen's face. Thus, the mist monster, Hoshigami Kisame, perished that day. Itachi quickly assessed the situation. Kisami's ring was next to his adversaries, he was outnumbered 2-1, and his partner was dead. Attempting to recover the rings was too dangerous since this mission was already a failure. It was best to limit additional losses. Just as the building's structure started to transform into soft, mushy flesh thanks to the frog sage, Itachi turned around and fled. Black flames burned through the fleshy wall, creating a tiny opening that the Uchiha could use to escape. Amaterasu. Itachi muttered as his eyes transformed into their Mangekyo form and he cried out blood. Jiraiya claimed to have seen the black flames and said, "Unbelievable," to burn through the esophagus of the great fire-breathing toad. As Jiraiya pulled out a scroll and started to seal the black flames inside, she saw Naruto pocket a ring that Kisame was wearing. Jiraiya tensed visibly as Naruto said, "So Ero Sennin," in a tone of utter indifference. "Would you be kind enough to tell me why two S-class missing nins were targeting me?" He didn't really want to tell the blonde about this, but it appears that it's too late to keep the boy in the dark. Jiraiya sighed as he turned to face Naruto. He looked sternly at the blonde and said, "There is a group of S-rank missing nins called Akatsuki." He continued to stare at the composed and level-headed looking team, adding, "And according to my sources they are going after Jinchurikis. Why they are doing it I do not know, but I do know that this won't be the last time you will be seeing them." He was anything but calm. No. The boy's anger over the news he had heard drove him to the brink of utter rage and into a state of calm rage. The audacity to pursue him and his kind was displayed by someone to pursue those who have already endured suffering at the hands of others. For a moment, he recalled Gaara and the boy's damage. He would be damned if he allowed a group of jerks to go around kidnapping the Jinchuriki, who have already endured so much. As he vowed to eradicate that group from the face of the earth, he thought in private, "Nay. I swear I won't let anything happen to you or your brothers and sisters." Even though he knew he had little chance against a whole group of S-rank missing nins, he knew he would prevail as long as he was standing, had Eiko by his side, and had eyes. But this was not the moment. They will have to wait to deal with their group. Though a little hesitant, his tenant said, "Thank you, Naru-kun," which the blonde understood right away. "Hey, what's wrong?" "Nay." The Biju said, "It's nothing," and then went silent, not answering the blonde's statements. Naruto scowled as he thought deeply her behavior wasn't typical, but he would give her the space she desired if she didn't want to discuss it. As he started to consider Akatsuki and how they might impact his plans, the teenager shook his head as the Sannin was kicked in the face by a blur of green. Jiraiya's attention was diverted by a kunai striking the wall, but Naruto was too preoccupied to notice it. It's a shame he didn't see it because he would have laughed. There were more pressing issues to attend to: the birth of a killer by Satsujin. 2 days have passed since Jiraiya was kicked in the face by Maeda Guy and the Akatsuki incident. The two missing nins who just attacked Konoha and rendered 3 other Jonins incapacitated were apparently being pursued by the elite Jonin. Since then, Jiraiya has been more somber than usual, eschewing his typical lecherous behavior by a small and attempting to behave like a respectable adult. He watched Naruto teach the teenager a few jutsus as they continued sparring on their way to their destination. As he and Jiraiya trained, Naruto wasn't really giving it his all because he was too preoccupied with completing his plans. Since Akatsuki was pursuing him, he was unable to postpone his plans any longer. It was almost time to depart from Konoha. After 4 days of travel, the two finally arrived in Tanzaku town. In the middle of the day, Jiraiya felt it was his duty to assist Naruto in getting as ready as possible for the impending threat, even though they could have arrived in a day if he had consented to run and cut back on their training. After securing their accommodations, Naruto left a hotel and started to walk alongside the self-described super pervert, thinking, well, at least his lessons are useful. As he pointed to a nearby establishment, which was, predictably, a bar, Jiraiya said, "We should grab something to eat before we look for Tsunade Gaki." "Let's go there," the old man added, to which the young shinobi responded with a slight shrug. Before he heard Jiraiya yell, "Tsunade," Naruto thought, "Sure, why not? We might even find Tsunade here." Holy shit, Naruto thought as his gaze followed the bar and he discovered a woman sitting alone in one of the stands. She had a pigtail style and the largest set of breasts he had ever seen in his life. Her cheeks were flushed, indicating that she was obviously wasted. Tsunade asked, "Jiraiya?" and then gulped down another bottle of beer. She put the bottle down and said, "Just my luck, my past decides to come back at the same frigging day. So what do you want, Jiraiya?" she asked, hiccuping near the end. With narrowed eyes, Jiraiya questioned, "Orochimaru was here?" As Naruto gazed at Tsunade, he thought, he probably wants his hands fixed, but judging by how she is right now, I'd rather not take the chance. The woman is clearly unstable. "Yeah, wanted me to heal his arms. Apparently sensei fucked him up good, and because of that old monkey the bastard took Shizune," she said, gripping her bottle so tightly that it exploded into thousands of shards, and Suande growled at the sound of that name. In order to avoid getting directly involved in this situation, Naruto simply remained silent while he watched the two argue. Even if there was a reasonable chance that he could beat her, he would never go up against a drunk Sannin. "Who's the brat Jiraiya?" The teenager had just finished giving the waiter his orders when he responded, Uzumaki Naruto. After giving the teenager a long look, Tsunade turned back to Jiraiya and asked, "I thought you said you'd never have an apprentice again?" Near the end, the man complained, "Oh, he's not my apprentice." Jiraiya shook his hands in front of him and said, "He's just learning some jutsu from me. He doesn't even want to sign the Toad contract." "So why are you here, Jiraiya?" The Toad sage looked at Tsunade, who didn't appear overly shocked by the news, and sighed, "Well, you see, Sarutobi-sensei died. Orochimaru already told me, and please don't tell me this is going where I think it is." "Yes, the council has decided that you Senju Tsunade will be the Godem Hokage of Konoha." When she said, "You want me to be Hokage? Ha 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 ha, Jiraiya, have you gone senile like sensei? Hokages are fools. No one would seriously consider taking that job. That's just retarded." The blonde secretly agreed with her that she didn't like the other cages. Well, mostly the third and somewhat the fourth, but he didn't mind the first or second. The waiter placed a tray with several sticks of chicken skewers next to the young shinobi and said, "Sir, here's your order." Naruto took one and began eating while listening to the two adults' meaningless arguments. "Arigato," was his response. "This is Hokage save Shizune from that. Don't take Orochimaru's invitation. Such things, this could take some time," he thought. The birth of a killer by Satsujin. Everything was on fire, the house was burning, and it was hot. Her eyes began to well up with tears as she gradually choked on the smoke and coughed. She knew this, she was too familiar with this. This scene appeared to be hell. She began to scream. Because she was having a dream. She was aware because she had seen this dream a long time ago. She has also been having this dream repeatedly for the past few days. She could now see multiple shadows standing among the pyre, which had initially appeared blurry but had gradually started to clear. She heard the muffled shouting, "U, D, kill, Mo, Y, fault, M," and rubbed her eyes, frantically trying to figure out who it was. One of the shadows attempted to beg the other, saying, "W, I, W, H, A, K, not A, M." As the other shadow vanished, another said, "N, Y, D." Another shadow murmured, as it was gradually encircled by more shadows. Voices started to flood the girl's head again, and she felt her chest tighten. There was only one thing it was causing her to do: to murder Satsujin. The killer's birth. After arriving in Tanzaku town with Jiraiya a week ago, Naruto honestly believed that this was one of the most fruitful periods of his life. In addition to creating clones and sending them out to gather information about a particular clan, he began doubling his training within his mindscape. As it turned out, early on the 7th day, one of his clones deceived him and gave him the information he desired. He was fairly certain that this would be his final expedition to Konoha. In addition, he observed Jiraiya's unsuccessful attempt to persuade Tsunade to allow him to lead a rescue effort for Shizune over the past week, as the Senju believed Jiraiya might use it as leverage to persuade her to become the new Hokage. She was quite clear that she didn't want the position. It was early in the morning, and Tsunade had just slipped out of the hotel. Naruto yawned as he looked out his hotel room window. "So you're going to Orochimaru, huh?" he muttered to himself while creating a clone with his hand. His tenant agreed with him in silence as he thought, nay, be ready, we might be fighting one or two of the Sannin soon." If Tsunade truly did choose to support the snake bastard, this was going to be a difficult battle. He was fairly certain that the clone already knew what to do, so there was no need to instruct it. Naruto nodded at it before climbing out the window and beginning to follow Tsunade. When Tsunade arrived at a clearing on the outskirts of Tanzaku, Naruto trailed behind her. The young shinobi inhaled deeply as he deliberately slowed down his body's processes, thereby erasing his presence, and spied on Tsunade while hiding behind a nearby rock. Naruto heard Orochimaru's sickening voice ask, "So Tsunade, are you willing to help me now?" And a moment later, the man himself showed up. Tsunade looked around and asked, "Where's Shizune?" The snake Sannin grinned and yelled, "Kabuto," as a white-haired man with bespectacles emerged, clutching a black-haired woman in a kimono and pointing a kunai at her neck. Naruto regarded the man intently and thought, he looks familiar. According to his tenant, he was in the Chunin exams. The blonde responded, never noticed him, as he continued to observe the action. Tsunade's hands were glowing green as she approached Orochimaru slowly. The Sannin was just a few minutes away from having those damned hands fixed, and his smile widened. Kabuto yelled, "Orochimaru-sama, get away from her," as Orochimaru leapt back in time to avoid Tsunade's superpowered haymaker. "So even with a hostage you choose to betray me, Tsunade?" Tsunade directed her chakra to her legs. Without responding, she leapt to her feet and sprinted in Kabuto's direction. As he leapt from his hiding spot and opened his tanto, Naruto shook his head and muttered, "Stupid old hag." The Senju was obviously not thinking clearly, because she would have stalled or waited for a better chance to acquire her student before trying to beat the snake. Orochimaru shot a futon Daitapa at Tsunade as Naruto charged into the battleground, hitting her with a blast of wind just before she reached Kabuto. Orochimaru sarcastically remarked, "Kabuto, do it," and started laughing uncontrollably. "I do not take kindly to those who wrong me, Tsunade. I hope you should have learned that ages ago. If you were unwilling to cooperate, you have no use for me." "Hi." Tsunade's eyes widened as blood splattered across her face as she asked, "What?" In addition to not being her blood, it wasn't Kabuto's or even Orochimaru's. Shizune's blood was involved, and it was the blood spurting from her jugular, which Kabuto had now severed. Something inside Tsunade suddenly snapped. She wasn't sure what it was, but it did, so she went and charged at Kabuto this time. Orochimaru didn't try to stop them, and Kabuto leapt away, leaving a bleeding Shizune in his wake. Tsunade began to shake as her homophobia took over, and she exclaimed, "Shizune!" As she held her apprentice in her lap, Tsunade examined the wound on her apprentice's neck and bit her lip. Tsunade attempted to heal Shizune's neck wound by channeling chakra into her hands while shaking her head. She had 2 minutes before her apprentice died from the bleeding. She had 2 minutes to repair the damage and halt the bleeding by using one of her medical jutsu techniques. It took her 2 minutes to do so. If only Orochimaru hadn't abruptly thrown her away by putting himself in the way of Tsunade's injured student. The man said, "Impressive, it looks like you've snapped out of your hemophobia," as he abruptly ducked and backed up a few steps to avoid an axe kick that was aimed at his neck and a few quick tanto swipes from the well-known newcomer. The man said, "Nice to see you, Naruto-kun." As he examined the Sannin's arms, the blonde remarked, "Likewise, Shiki Fujin?" he asked, genuinely startling Orochimaru. "Oh, how did you find out, Naruto-kun?" As Naruto tried to charge in, the white-haired man abruptly butted in by punching the teenager in the face, forcing him to jump away. He then pulled out a few kunais with explosive tags and threw them at Kabuto. "Simple, Uzumaki, remember?" Naruto asked as Naruto fired off a futon Daitapa of his own, accelerating his projectiles. He asked, "But let me ask, how did you manage to force the monkey to use that technique on you?" As he placed his hands on the ground and began going through some hand seals himself, Kabuto screamed, "Doden!" Doryuheki, Earth-style wall. As a wall of earth emerged from the ground, shielding the two shinobi from the flurry of explosive kunais. "Go to Shizune," was the words that Naruto said as he turned to face Tsunade. "But there's no way, you see, eh?" She nodded and started to walk to her apprentice, but Naruto interrupted, saying, "Go." She was running out of time. Orochimaru and Kabuto were unharmed when the earthen wall collapsed as the explosions subsided. "Well, you see, I used Edo Tensei and summoned the first and second Hokage, hoping to use them to kill Sensei," he said, choosing to respond truthfully. For once, the blonde Jinchuriki couldn't help but smile when he heard this information. "Unfortunately, as you mentioned, Sensei used Shiki Fujin and sealed the cage's soul, his soul, along with my arms inside the belly of death," he continued. When Kabuto collapsed next to his master, revealing that it was nothing more than a Tsuchi Bunshin and that the real one had gone underground after building the wall, Naruto thought, "Oh god, this is just too good to be true." "Cool story, bro." Orochimaru looked at Tsunade as she began to heal Shizune and said, "Cool story. Indeed. Now, Naru-kun, would you like to join my side? I can promise you what you wish for the most." He responded with a fireball, tempting offer, "But I plan on accomplishing my own goals on my own terms." And Kabuto instantly leapt out from under the earth to avoid the attack. The words, "Not bad, Naruto," came from Kabuto. A tick mark appeared on Kabuto's face, prompting Naruto to ask, "Huh, you say something? Are you sure, Naruto? Because either way I know you will follow my path." As Kabuto charged in an attempt to silence the arrogant genin who believed he was on the same level as his master, Naruto shook his head and said, "No, I won't. I'll succeed where you failed," he corrected Orochimaru. Orochimaru laughed out loud, even though he felt insulted, and he thought the boy's attitude was great. "You know what, I'll keep my offer standing, but for now please entertain yourself with Kabuto while I get rid of Tsunade. Despite her probable usefulness, I cannot risk her becoming the new Hokage of Konoha. Huh? How do you know? Naruto asked, continuing to sidestep Kabuto's blows while occasionally retaliating with a knife hand that was strong enough to pierce the bespectacled man's skin, though strangely, the wounds were gradually getting better on their own. Orochimaru said, "You just told me," while Naruto swore in his head what a genin error that was. Orochimaru continued to smile and said, "But in any case, Tsunade will not go back to Konoha, and even if she does, I will make sure that she is incapable of leading the country." Naruto heard the girl named Shizune say, "Sorry, Tsunade-sama." Judging from her tone, it seemed likely that she was about to pass away from her injuries. He heard Tsunade say, "No, no, no, don't give up, it's all going to be fine." "Sorry, sensei. Don't be. The cut is almost healed, you just need to a blood pill or two and you'll live." "Sayonara." "No." Tsunade cried, causing Naruto to halt and turn to face her. She was still tending to her apprentice's neck, her eyes closed and tears streaming down her cheeks. There was a problem. He had a gut feeling that something was amiss, and Orochimaru's smile conveyed more information than words could. He looked at Shizune's body right away. Before he could yell and alert Tsunade, Kabuto chose to take advantage of the opening Naruto had just created. The man attacked the distracted blonde, striking him in the thigh with a knife hand, severing several muscles. The teenager then retaliated by palming the white-haired man in the chest, pushing him back. Naruto's eyes widened as he instantly realized Orochimaru's plan. "Sue." Naruto's sentence was interrupted when a huge, repulsive bursting noise reverberated throughout the clearing, and a large white snake split the black-haired girl in two as it exploded out of her stomach. Tsunade's eyes widened as she mumbled, "What?" as the white snake bit her arm, injecting her bloodstream with its fast-acting venom, which nearly immediately knocked her out. As he growled in agony, Naruto thought, "Shit." He could feel Eiko gradually healing his wounds, but he did not like his chances. This wasn't good. Tsunade was unable to function. Shizune had passed away. Additionally, he was still up against a cage-level nin in Orochimaru and an elite Jonin-leveled shinobi in Kabuto. Fan-fucking-tastic, he thought as he sprinted toward Tsunade, slicing the white snake that had bitten her to tend to the unconscious Sannin. He instantly created a clone and positioned himself defensively in front of Kabuto and Orochimaru. "So Naruto-kun, will you reconsider my offer?" Orochimaru stood composedly, but Naruto spat out, "Shit," when he saw Kabuto creeping toward him. Naruto took a deep breath and stood motionless. As he made 3 more clones and left the other one to form a square around Tsunade, he thought, "Well, here goes nothing." They then went through some hand seals to create a familiar purplish barrier over the woman. "Bad move, Naruto." Kabuto laughed, "Even though your chakra reserves are huge, I know you spent a lot of chakra to create those clones since that jutsu requires high amounts of chakra." "Thank you, Mr. Exposition," was Naruto's deadpan as he prepared to attack the white-haired shinobi by channeling chakra throughout his body. Naruto thought, "About damn time," as he sensed a sizable chakra signature coming. Another newcomer, who appeared utterly furious, then entered the battlefield, and Naruto charged in and attacked Kabuto. The newcomer sprinted in the direction of Orochimaru. The slender snake, who was still grinning. The snake was in the process of leaping away from Jiraiya when the sphere of destruction missed its target and struck the ground. Instead, Jiraiya yelled, "Orochimaru!" as he charged at his former teammate Rasengan, who was already in hand. "Jiraiya!" Orochimaru snarled as he berated the interfering Sannin. "Bastard!" Jiraiya retorted, surveying the scene. Naruto was engaged in combat with Orochimaru's student. Despite being unconscious, Tsunade was protected by Shizune and the barrier the blonde had built. The toad sage shook his head and closed his eyes. He ought to be accustomed to witnessing deaths by now, but witnessing the death of a loved one, particularly Tsunade, was a unique experience. He was aware that Tsunade had just been broken by his jerk of a teammate. It would only take Shizune's passing to plunge her into a deeper depression. Nawaki was the first. Dan came next. Shizune now. For now, he knew, but he would count himself fortunate if Tsunade could still think or speak normally. After this, it was going to be impossible for her to be caged in her current state because she won't be visiting Konoha anytime soon. He heard the blonde exclaim, "Rasengan," as she threw a spiraling chakra sphere into the bespectacled boy's stomach, sending him flying in the direction of a nearby rock. Gritting his teeth, Jiraiya exhaled a fire and went through some hand seals, making his former teammate leap away to avoid the attack. The time was not for conversation right now. His actions will be more powerful than his words. As he ran toward the snake, who already had his sword out of his mouth, the toad sage thought, "Orochimaru, you've gone too far this time." As he started trading blows with the man, the toad sage's chakra was already channeling in his body. Kata Hubby vs Kata the Frog, throw in a kick as well as a punch, block, stab, and swipe here and there. As they danced around each other's blows and attempted to incapacitate each other with their practiced style, the two skilled fighters traded blows with the fluidity of water, but neither was landing any good blows. And it was beginning to irritate them both. The snake was finally caught off guard when Jiraiya abruptly kneed him in the chest, then extended his leg into a kick and pushed the man back. He clicked his tongue as he delivered another punch, this one faint but effective. As his protege slowly rose from the blonde's earlier attack and Sunshine next to his master, Kabuto, Orochimaru let out a growl. Not to be outdone, Naruto himself disappeared through Shunshin and reappeared next to Jiraiya, who was standing defensively with his Tonto in front of his body in a reverse grip. Before he started going through some hand seals, Jiraiya bit his thumb and drew blood, saying, "Stand back, Naruto. Kachiyose no jutsu." Jiraiya yelled as he applied pressure to the ground, causing the entire area to fill with smoke. Kabuto mimicked this action by applying blood to a neatly written seal in Orochimaru's arms. The smoke gradually dissipated, revealing Orochimaru and his associates standing atop a massive purple snake, while Jiraiya and Naruto stood atop a giant frog that resembled a yakuza. The frog spit out, "Manda," upon seeing the snake. The snake hissed, "Gamabunta," out as the snake slowly got ready to slither in the direction of the frog. It declared, "I'll be expecting the offerings, Orochimaru." "Bunta!" Jiraiya yelled in a tone so solemn that even the frog hardly ever heard the man these days. Gamabunta remarked, "No need to tell me, Jiraiya," as he caught a glimpse of the unconscious Tsunade and the remnants of what he remembered to be the slug woman's apprentice. "I've been itching to get a new snake-skinned wallet, you know," the toad said slowly as he drew his Tonto. Jiraiya gave the command, "Naruto, return to Tsunade." As he leapt off the toad, Naruto nodded as Kabuto leapt from Manda. Orochimaru commanded, "Kabuto, knock Naruto out so his clones will kill Tsunade afterwards. If we can't use her, then no one can." Satsujin. A killer's birth. When the blonde noticed Kabuto sprinting in his direction, he let out another sigh. He didn't want to deal with a mad Jiraiya, but he could have easily dispelled his clones and allowed Kabuto to kill Tsunade if he had truly wanted to. The young shinobi would appreciate it if he didn't have to deal with a vengeful Jiraiya because, in all honesty, the normal one was hardly bearable. In addition, he might accidentally kill the sage if Jiraiya yelled at him. The man might still be useful later, so he really didn't want to do that. "Naruto, I don't really want you to die since Orochimaru-sama has really taken quite a liking to you just as he likes Sasuke, so why don't you?" As his tenant snickered, Naruto deadpanned, "Sorry, I don't swing that way." He swayed his body back to avoid Kabuto's punch, then flipped himself off the ground, kicking the man in the face as he landed on his hand in the ground. "I'd rather be with a girl," he said. Kabuto charged at Naruto again, chakra coating his hands as he tried to throw different knife hands at the young shinobi. "You know Kabuto," Naruto said as he pushed himself off the ground and flipped a few feet away from Kabuto. "You know, if I really wanted to, I could have killed you 100 times over," Naruto told him. "Don't bluff, Naruto, it's highly unbecoming of you." When the white-haired man grabbed the offending knife hand by the wrist and struck Kabuto's face with an open-handed palm strike, smashing his glasses before the man slowly staggered back bleeding, Naruto responded, "Oh, it wasn't a bluff." As he attempted to provoke or bluff the teenager, the snake's apprentice shook his head and wiped the blood from his face. "Really, Naruto? You see, in my perspective, I could have killed you 100 times as well. It's just that Master wants you, so I'm holding back," he said. "Oh, and who's bluffing now, Kabuto?" Naruto asked, placing his hands on his hips and letting his stance relax. "I'm also holding back, and you know what, Kabuto?" he asked, abruptly disappearing from Kabuto's vision, shocking the man. "You're not worthy of facing my true power," Naruto snapped back, channeling wind chakra into his Tonto and slashing the Kabuto in the chest, leaving a deep wound that grew larger when he spun around and trusted a knife hand in the wound. As anticipated, Kabuto let out a painful scream as he threw the blonde away with a violent kick and leapt back to try to bandage his injuries. "So Kabuto, care to tell me who's holding back now?" Naruto asked, beaming maniacally at Kabuto for the first time. The man realized why his master admired the boy so much, as he briefly believed he saw his master's outline on the boy's back. However, that was sufficient to persuade Kabuto that he might pass away today. As he charged at Kabuto, Naruto left the sentence hanging, saying, "Oh, and you should work on provoking your enemy, Kabuto, because really if you piss the wrong person off, well." The man swiftly made a Tsuchi Bunshin and replaced himself with it in time to avoid a knife hand aimed at his neck, but he said, "Shit." He stood a few feet away from Naruto, still clutching his wounds, and threw a few kunai at the boy, saying, "Ha ha ha, what are you talking about, Naruto? I did nothing to provoke you." The blonde used his tanto to block the kunais, saying, "Orochimaru really sucks at teaching. Well, then what if I said, haha, you should try harder. Yeah, Orochimaru should really try harder to teach his mooks how to fight. I mean, come on, if you his best man, then he really has. Then again, I think the only thing you've picked up over the year you've studied under him was his dick up your ass." Naruto replied with a grin. With a snap, Kabuto charged in. Naruto thought, worked like a charm, and he quickly sealed his tanto. "You know what? I don't even need my tanto to beat you," he said, avoiding Kabuto's overextended knife hand thrust before he smashed his elbow at the man's face in retaliation. After tripping Kabuto and stepping back a few paces, he said, "Won't work, Kabuto. Really, aside from that scalpel thing with your hands, can you do anything else?" As the Kabuto in front of him crumbled into dust, the blonde questioned, "I mean, yes, you did use the earth jutsu earlier, but really? Just that? Well, look at that, the snake's bitch does know some other moves?" Naruto yelled as he swiftly went through some hand seals and shot a ball of flame towards the ground, forcing him to jump away from the ground in order to avoid two hands emerging from beneath the earth. Unfortunately, Kabuto had enough time to jump away from the fireball and get himself off the ground. Well done. Now that he was in the air, however, he could not avoid what the blonde was going to do. The clone, Cage Bunshin, created a seal-less cage, took Naruto by the arm, threw him in Kabuto's direction, and then dispelled him. For Kabuto, this was going to be terrible. With a sick smile on the boy's face, Naruto shot towards the man, causing his eyes to widen. Crossing his hands to protect himself from the oncoming attack, Kabuto swiftly strengthened his body by channeling as much of the chakra he had left. Ichi. A knee slammed through Kabuto's defenses. Knee. Kabuto squirmed in agony as two palms struck his temples, causing his defenses to drop. San. He exclaimed as a foot stomped him on the face, cracking his nose as two hands grabbed his arms and pulled them apart. He heard the boy say, "Yan," before he felt two knife hands pierce his shoulders and pull both of his arms out of their sockets. Go, forced him to do nothing but watch as the boy pulled the bloodied hands off his shoulder and then wrapped them around his head, threatening to knee him in the face. As the boy gave him a single knee to the face before releasing his grip, he thought, why is it always the face? As the boy brought his hands together and raised them into the air, Kabuto was already barely conscious. The boy yelled, "Roku," as he pounded his hands against Kabuto's helpless chest, sending the teenager plummeting into the earth and leaving a sizable crater in his wake. "Nana," Naruto uttered as he raised his leg in midair, ready to strike Kabuto's head with an axe kick as he descended slowly from the sky. As he saw someone kicking his offending leg, Naruto snickered, "Hey, it seems you live for now, Kabuto," the blonde remarked, glancing at a severely injured and battered Orochimaru who had his leg up kicking against the blonde's own leg. Orochimaru must have calculated his losses and made plans for a swift withdrawal based on the man's wounds and the sounds of Jiraiya yelling behind him. "I can't let you kill him, Naru-kun, he is just too useful." The blonde said, "Figures, see you next time, Orochimaru," as he fell backward and hit the ground a few paces ahead of Jiraiya before the purple snake Manda repelled him. Naruto glanced at his side and saw that it appeared to have stabbed his tanto in the mouth and pinned it to the ground. He didn't know how the frog accomplished that. He turned to face Orochimaru once more, but he had already vanished. Naruto put a hand on the older man's shoulder and then cocked his head in the direction of the unconscious Tsunade just as Jiraiya was ready to pursue him. Jiraiya sighed, realizing that taking care of Tsunade at this moment was more important than pursuing and killing Orochimaru. As a result, nobody really won anything in the battle that took place in Tanzaku town. The birth of a killer by Satsujin Tsunade woke up a few hours after the battle, and naturally, her first action was to grasp her disciple's dead body while sobbing. The boy stood by the woman's side once more, watching her weep as he recalled seeing the same scene in the waves during his mission. "Will I shed a tear for someone? Will someone shed a tear for me, too?" The blonde reflected again, his face solemn, feeling a void of some kind inside himself. The blonde heard, "Naruto," and cocked his head in Jiraiya's direction, who was holding a scroll. The man looked at Tsunade and said, "I want you to deliver this to the elders for me. This is just the report of this mission. Normally I'd send one of my frogs to do it or go to Konoha myself and deliver it for you, but..." The man shook his head, clearly messed up by the few hours, as he began drinking right away except for Naruto. It appears that the entire incident had a negative impact on each of them. The teen nodded, and he said, "I have to stay here for Tsunade-hime." As he grasped the scroll, The Jinchuriki replied, I understand. Naruto, I know you're strong enough to take care of yourself, so I just want you to stay safe. Without responding, Naruto simply spun around and began to run in Konoha's direction while channeling chakra into his body. The time had come, it was the moment he had been anticipating. It was time to get out of Konoha. There was one more thing he needed to do before he could leave. All he could hope for was that she would agree, because he truly cared about her. The Birth of a Killer by Satsujin. In the shadows of her room, a set of eyes opened. She had another dream, this one more vivid than the last. At last, she understood the significance of the visions. It was recollections, memories that were blocked by different individuals who tampered with her mind. With a single tear falling from her eye, she put her hand on her chest and gripped her heart, whispering, I remember. Early in the morning, Naruto arrived in Konoha, carrying a scroll. As he passed the village's gates, he only really needed one day, but his tenant insisted that he take a break, so it took him 2 days to return to Konoha. He attempted to argue with her, but sadly, he was never successful. As he approached the Hokage's office slowly, the blonde shook his head. The boy could hardly contain his excitement, despite his best efforts to maintain his cool, collected exterior. Freedom was only a few hours away. For that, who wouldn't be thrilled? Ignoring the secretary's frown, Naruto arrived at the office. The teenager opened the door and saw the elders Homura and Kohaku working on paperwork behind the Hokage's desk. With a hint of venom in his voice that the Jinchuriki did not miss, Homura asked, Where is Jiraiya? Without responding, Naruto simply moved to the table and set a scroll on top of a stack of papers. The blonde immediately turned around and headed out. After doing so, Kohaku inquired, Where do you think you're going? Jiraiya told me to deliver the scroll. I did, and now I am going back to my apartment as my mission is done. He glanced back at them. As she squinted at the boy, Kohaku remarked, No one gave you permission to leave this room. Naruto responded, You two aren't the Hokage, and he left the office, leaving Homura and Kohaku in a rage. Since Naruto detested them and they detested Naruto, the two should have learned their lesson by now. It really was that easy. The idea of killing the two kept coming to mind every second, and the blonde couldn't bear to be in the same room as them. He won't kill them, though he doesn't have to. He is aware that those two's stupidity would ultimately bring Konoha to its knees, and that at one point the populace would demand their execution for doing something stupid, like persuading the current Kage to declare war or something. To prevent him from killing them, no matter how alluring it was. However, Naruto was unaware of the old hag's unexpected smile as he was leaving. Homura, the daimyo is still in the village, right? Yes, he is still looking over the repairs. Why do you ask? As she spoke, the elderly woman simply grinned. Before long, Homura was grinning too. 8. As Naruto entered his apartment, he glanced at the calendar before heading to the Kurama compound. He had a few things to gather and attempted to persuade Yakumo to at least think about leaving Konoha with him. He had to try to ask, even though he knew it was a completely pointless endeavor and that the girl was likely to decline his offer. After all, he did think of her as a friend without having to give them instructions. Naruto made a few clones, who all nodded and started putting different explosive tags throughout his apartment. As some of the other clones started removing scrolls and sealing some common books and journals that Naruto kept in his room, he uttered the words, "Leave no evidence behind." "Good," he said. Making his way slowly to his bed, the teenager pulled out a small box and knelt down to move a loose floorboard. It contained several scrolls and, more significantly, a mask. The Yakumo gave him the white frowning mask. Looking at it, he grinned and recalled their conversation when the girl handed him the mask. "Hey, always sad inside, huh?" he asked. He put the mask inside the box and took out another scroll, saying, "Who knows, you might be right." A collection of eerie masks that he discovered in an ancient ruin close to Konoha's outskirts materialized as he opened the scroll and directed chakra into it. He gazed at the masks and remarked, I wonder which one of these has their souls." In the future, he ought to give Orochimaru credit for that little bit of knowledge. The blonde whispered, "Now if only I knew how to use Edo Tensei," as he carefully replaced the masks, put the scroll back inside the box, and then sealed the box inside another scroll. He watched his clones before getting up and sitting on his bed. All he needed to do was wait for them to be done before leaving his apartment. The blonde had a few minutes to spare, so he relaxed a little by yawning. In other places, the Kurama clan's heiress rose slowly from her bed and walked to the bathroom. Yakumo opened the door and stared at her face in the mirror for several minutes. She was extremely tired and pale, and there was no way anyone could claim that she was in good health. She is still going to leave today, though. After all, it was a memorable day. After cleaning herself up, The girl returned to the room from the restroom. She undressed and changed into a black kimono that was exquisitely woven and had red lilies adorning the sleeves. The girl gazed at a tiny white mask as she made her way slowly to her desk. After what seemed like an eternity of staring at the object, she took it and tucked it inside her kimono. Then Yakumo turned and walked out of the compound toward the door. 7. There were people of all ages and sizes sitting in a distinguished office in the Hokage Tower, but they all had different powers in their respective domains. No one really knew the agenda for the impromptu meeting, but they did know that it was extremely important. A man dressed in exquisite robes appropriate for his position as one of the most powerful and influential individuals in the elemental nations sat on one side of a long rectangular table. 2 guards stood behind the man, always on guard and ready to kill anyone who dared to oppose their liege, like most of the people in the room except for one. This man, who was the current daimyo of the Land of Fire, was now perplexed by the meeting. The boy's father, Nara Shikaku, the Jonin commander of Konoha, was seated across from the daimyo. He looked as lethargic as ever, sandwiched between the Anbu commander and the one and only Shimura Danzo. Danzo began the meeting by setting a scroll on the table and saying, "We have received grave news from Jiraiya of the Sannin." This statement immediately caught everyone's attention, as even Shikaku, who is typically slack, sat up straight and gave Danzo a serious look. As he passed the scroll around the room to verify the information, Danzo added, Orochimaru attacked Senju Tsunade and her apprentice Kato Shizune before Jiraiya and his companion arrived in the scene. The report says that Shizune was kidnapped by Orochimaru and was planned to be used as a bargaining chip to coerce Tsunade Heim to join his side. Eventually a battle ensued which resulted in the death of Kato Shizune, which sadly brought the last Senju spiraling down into deeper depression, the likes of when her brother and lover were killed. Jiraiya decided to stay with her for a while to help her get back on her feet, he said while taking a moment to breathe deeply. Shikaku scowled because he didn't like the direction this discussion was taking. Only one person remained eligible to be the Hokage if Tsunade and Jiraiya were removed from the picture. As Shikaku frantically searched for other potential Hokage candidates, he thought, if only Kakashi was a bit older and had more experience. The daimyo looked at the shinobis and said, I was under the impression the Senju Tsunade was to become the next Hokage. Then who is to become the next Hokage? Danzo grinned and said, I nominate myself as a candidate to become the Godem of Konoha, as the red eye under his bandaged eyes started to affect the daimyo's decisions. Everything was going well as anticipated. 6. Naruto noticed the dark clouds gradually encircling Konoha. As he peered up at the sky, he said, looks like it's going to rain, as he continued to walk through a forest until he arrived at Yakumo's clan's compound. He began speaking with one of the guards who were posted outside the compound, stopping a few paces in front of it. I'd like to meet Yakumo. I need to talk to her about a mission that we were assigned to. He told the truth. The guard said, would you mind waiting for a second? A casual, no problems, take your time, was Naruto's reply as the guard dashed into the compound. After a patient 20 minutes or so, Naruto saw the sane man dash out of the compound. As Naruto raised an eyebrow and tapped his foot on the floor, the guard began, I am sorry, he then said, gasping for air, I have checked her room and any other room she often stays in, but she was not there. Naruto shook his head and the guard said, one of the maids did tell me that she left earlier and went to the village. I'm sorry if I was not much of a help, the man said. As he turned to leave the compound, Naruto answered, no, you've helped enough. As he walked calmly out of the compound, the blonde thought, where the hell is she? 5. Yakumo stood before a small but tidy shrine, surrounded by a sea of trees. She came here after leaving the compound earlier. She had a special day today. As he traced her soft, gentle fingers along the names engraved along the shrine, the girl gazed intently at it. Otto-san, Okawa-san, she said, removing her hand from it. She exclaimed, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry, I'm sorry for forgetting. As she felt her vision becoming hazy and the murderous thoughts gradually returning to her mind, the girl shook her head and said, I promise, I'll keep. No, she didn't want that to change her mind. She was trying desperately to contain it, but it was still trying to tell her to kill. She had no desire to kill, but she knew in her heart that's what she desired. She had no desire to kill. It informed her that murder is acceptable. She had no desire to kill. It informed her that person was accountable for all of her life's events. She had no desire to kill. It started playing back the memories of her parents passing and that night in the fire inside of her of the offender's acknowledgement of responsibility. She had no desire to kill. It informed her that the individual had deceived and misled her, that she was being laughed at like everyone else. I'm laughing. Making fun of her frailty, giggling at her shortcomings. Both the words telling her to kill and the sounds of laughter reverberated in her mind. Slowly, cracks appeared in her resolve she was unwilling to. Cracks began to appear more frequently she had no desire to. The person's beaming face materialized before her. The fissures continued to form. Yakumo's gaze wavered as she reached inside her kimono and gradually removed a basic mask. A mask of a face that never stops smiling. The comedy with the mask. Wearing the mask, she grinned. The mask was appropriate for her life. 4. A few minutes ago, the old Warhawk was reinstated as the Godem Hokage, and Danzo grinned again as he settled into the chair behind his new desk. He yearned for this day above all others. He would have grinned and leapt with delight, as he was experiencing on the inside, but the man had a reputation to maintain. As he examined the 4 pictures on the wall, the elderly Warhawk cocked his head to the side. Danzo secretly made a vow to himself and the other 4 former cages that he would surpass them all by guiding Konoha to greater heights than any of them could ever dream of. His expression was sour as he first glanced at the Shodem Hokage. That man was a powerful shinobi who could not be matched by Madara. At one point, he possessed all of Konoha's tailed beasts. He had the opportunity to subjugate the entire country if he had wanted to, but he was foolish enough to sell the animals to other countries. Then his gaze shifted to the Yondaime. He had a personal fondness for Minato, a brilliant, ruthless boy who was prepared to sacrifice everything for the village. The man demonstrated strength during the conflict, even earning the old Warhawk's respect. Hell, he was cool with anyone who could kill an entire army on their own. However, there's always a but. The man was too generous, which was a sign of weakness in and of itself. Because a shinobi ought to have no feelings. Then he glanced at Tobirama's photo, the only Hokage he truly held in high regard. Danzo thought that he was the perfect ninja. The man was strong, composed, logical, and cunning, and he never allowed his feelings to cloud his judgment. As his gaze strayed to the 3rd cage, the man said, "Tobirama-sensei, I will show you why you should have chosen me as Hokage instead of Hiruzen long ago." When the man finally looked away from the pictures and at a stack of folders in front of his desk, he said, "Saru, my friend, I will build on your mistakes and lead Konoha into a better future." Those folders had a high priority people he had to deal with as soon as he was appointed Hokage. As he snapped his fingers to call his Anbu and root Anbus to his side, the man grinned as he glanced at the first few folders. "My first order is Godem Hokage, 3. While strolling through the village, Naruto ignored the glares he was receiving and considered the possible location of Yakumo. He genuinely no longer cared about the villagers, and he hoped that today would be the last time he had to interact with them. "Complain," he mumbled, as he studied his rumbling stomach. The blonde said, "Might as well grab something to eat first," as he made his way to the closest business, a dango store that both Yakumo and Enko frequently visit. Then he abruptly stopped walking, and his eyes grew wide. He recalled that this morning he had checked the calendar. He recalled that day. Cursing, the blonde instantly sent chakra into his legs as he ran back towards the wooded area of Konoha, a date he later learned was significant to her. Where was he going? In the middle of the forest is a little shrine. 2. Ignoring his hunger, Naruto kept running until he came to a sudden stop at the little shrine. He finally found the person he was searching for, standing in front of the shrine with her back to him. The blonde noticed the girl's body tensing up suddenly and called out, "Yakumo," in between deep breaths. Slowly, the girl turned to face Naruto, but this time the blonde saw the smiling face of the mask she had brought for herself instead of her own face. A mask of constant smiles. "Uzumaki-san." Yakumo answered in a voice that was so icy that it made the Jinchuriki shudder. That was a tone he had never heard before. At least not from Yakumo. The girl nodded slowly as he explained, "I just got back, I remembered what day it is today and came here," he said. She slowly cocked her head to the side and put one finger in the eerie mosque smile, saying, "I see, thank you for that, Uzumaki-san." "Do you know what happened this day, Uzumaki-san?" "The day we met, and the day," the girl concluded for him, "the day my parents died." The girl asked, "Do you know why they died, Uzumaki-san?" As Naruto's eyes gradually widened as he gradually came to a realization. "You told me they died in a fire." She cocked her head to the side and said, "Unfortunately, that's what they made me believe. Kurenai-san, Sandame-san, and my uncle all planted false memories in me that concealed the truth. It was she who said, 'Do you know the truth, Uzumaki-san?'" Naruto swallowed but remained silent. She began to laugh aloud as she looked up at the cloudy, dark sky. "They were killed, Uzumaki-san, killed in front of me. I saw them kill Oto-san. They sliced him limb from limb and cauterized the wounds, laughing as they left him limbless and defenseless while they raped my mother in front of him," she said. "You know why they were killed?" "Yes, I understand why they were killed," Naruto said, closing his eyes. "And why was that, Uzumaki-san?" because during a council meeting to decide the fate of the demon your father voted to let the demon live. As she looked at him, the girl burst out laughing and said, "Thank you for being honest with me, Uzumaki-san." Now who was the demon? Given that she was only 10 steps away, Naruto looked at her and dared not respond. She said, "Nay Uzumaki-san," in a tone that was almost childish and playful. "Would you kindly die for me?" Was Naruto's scream as he felt his body being ripped apart, as though each muscle was being pulled out of him one by one. It wasn't a nice feeling at all, and things didn't look good for him because he was already trapped inside one of her genjutsus. Nay, he exclaimed. His tenant said, "Hi Naru-kun," as she started to channel her chakra into his system, gradually overpowering the genjutsu. As he emerged from the genjutsu, he saw Yakumo motionless in front of the shrine, and it felt like the world had fallen apart. He advanced 2 paces before becoming trapped in yet another genjutsu. In this one, he was repeatedly stabbed throughout his body after being flung into a sword-filled pit. Even though it hurt, he had experienced it since he was a young child. As he felt himself being stabbed by swords, he said, "I'm sorry," but his tenant quickly dispelled it for him once more. "Yakumo, Uzumaki-san, it's too late for apologize. I want to kill you." He apologized as he got caught in another genjutsu. In this one, he was kneeling in front of the village while everyone in Konoha started hurling rocks at him. As he took a few more steps in her direction, he apologized for not telling her that the genjutsu had been dispelled once more. She yelled back, "You lied to me." As the blonde felt trapped inside one of her genjutsus once more, he was in a pitch-black cavern. This time nothing was visible, audible, or odorous to him. It was terrifying because all he could feel was the agony of the unseen creatures that lived in the cave. As the illusion vanished again, his tenant cautioned, "Naru-kun, you had better deal with her soon because it's getting harder and harder to dispel these." Her distance from him was just 6 steps. As he swore, he could see tears running down the mask. The girl yelled, "I hate you. I hate you so much, Uzumaki. I deserve every moment of it, you do," she uttered as Naruto found himself trapped in another illusion, this time thrusting him into the sun itself, where his body seemed to be gradually being roasted and peeled away. The fact that his wounds were healing while they burned in this delusion didn't exactly help. As he dispelled the illusion, he screamed, "Arr!" He was already exhausted and breathing heavily, but he still needed to take a few more steps. When she was upset with him, this always worked. Just a few more steps. He hoped it would still work because it did when they were kids. As I stepped closer to the masked girl, she asked, "How long have you known? How long have you lied to me? How long have you been laughing at my back knowing that you were responsible for all the crap that I suffered for in my life? Since a few years ago, why did you lie to me? I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want you to suffer like this." The girl stomped her feet on the floor and said, "You should have told me." She clutched her head and yelled, "You should have been honest with me. You were my friend." "Yakumo." Naruto threw out his arm in her direction as he closed the gap between them. She screamed, "Don't touch me," and retreated from the blonde as Naruto felt hundreds or even thousands of lightning bolts suddenly attack his body. It reminded him of his childhood near-death experience. The pain was unbearable. He felt like screaming in agony. Despite his temptation, he had to maintain his strength. He approached her while being tormented by pain. There was no longer any need to lie or maintain appearances. She or Eiko would be the only people he would confide in about his true feelings. As her illusion continued to shoot bolt after bolt of lightning at the teenager, she screamed, "I hate you. I want to kill you. I want to kill you so badly. You ruined my life. You were the root of everything. You ruined my life." He waited through each one, gritting his teeth. As another lightning strike struck the blonde, she yelled, "Why don't you just die?" Nevertheless, he shrugged every bolt she threw at him and kept on walking. She yelled, "Stay away," as a huge lightning bolt struck the blonde, followed by hundreds or even thousands of bolts striking him from all directions. Any normal person would have died from the stimulation alone. Unfortunately, he was anything but normal. Naruto continued to move in her direction until he eventually found himself in front of Yakumo. She cried out, "No," as Naruto was struck by another lightning strike. His senses were already dulled by then, and he was no longer able to perceive it. The blonde gave Yakumo a quick glance before he put his arms around her and gave her a cozy embrace. "Get off me," she screamed as she fought her way out of his embrace. While she was still struggling, he said, "I'm sorry, Yakumo. I know you have every right to hate me, but I just want you to know I'm sorry. I'm absolutely sorry." Naruto's usual tone of coldness vanished, and he continued to whisper at her, apologizing for his sins. Yakumo continued to struggle. He apologized repeatedly. "Why? He continued to apologize as she continued to struggle. She questioned, "Why are you still apologizing?" "Because I hate myself," replied the man. "I hate myself for causing pain to you of all people. I hated it. Every waking moment I wanted to tell you the truth and apologize, but I was scared. I was so scared that you were going to hate me when I told you," he said as he tightened his embrace. "I was scared of losing a friend," he said. "I was afraid that you of all people would hate me. I didn't want you to hate me." She whispered inaudibly, "Why?" As tears streamed down her face she said, Why can't I just hate you? Why?" As the thoughts in her mind gradually faded and were replaced by a variety of her most treasured memories. "Anyo, are you okay? Why? There, let it all out there. Why can't I hate you? Are you okay? I want to kill you. Remember that we are ninjas who kill for a living. You are not a monster for doing so. I'm supposed to hate you. I'm supposed to despise you. You have no friends, do you? I'll be your friend then." "Why?" she exclaimed, tears still streaming from her eyes. "You could have killed me any time I was stuck in one of your illusions. Why didn't you kill me?" she responded. "I can't kill you," she said in a whisper. She put a hand on her face and removed her mask, then said, "Despite what it told me," while glancing at him, "despite what the voices in my head were saying, despite all those words, I couldn't come to hate you. I couldn't kill you," she said, exposing her deathly pale face and her bloodshot eyes, which were constantly streaming with tears. "Despite how much I wanted to, you were always there for me. You helped me out, even if you're the one who caused me so much pain. You were also the one who comforted me." The girl put her hand on Naruto's face and shook her head, sobbing, "I couldn't kill you because you were my first friend." Her words, "You were my best friend," were followed by, "my teammate," before she turned away as Naruto's eyes widened in surprise and then quickly returned to normal. She confessed, "My crush." He smiled warmly at her, "Kumo," and she covered his mouth with a finger. She looked him in the eyes and said, "Let me finish." With a sorrowful smile, she said, "I just couldn't help it," closing her eyes and drawing herself closer to the boy as she kissed him on the lips. "You were nice to me when no one else was. Even though you often acted cold, I knew you cared about me, and you even helped me make friends despite not making some for yourself." The sensation of her lips touching his caused Naruto's mind to freeze, and it took him a few seconds to fully comprehend what was happening before he chose to close his eyes and return the kiss. The blonde was pleased by a small, innocent deed. It was the first time he had ever felt truly loved by someone other than his tenant. 0. Play Yuki Kajiura's Hear Our Prayer until the very end. Naruto opened his eyes abruptly as he experienced a sudden sensation of warmth in his abdomen. When he turned to face Yakumo, he saw that her eyes were also open. They both stopped kissing slowly. The crimson ichor, blood, poured from her mouth. When Naruto looked down, he saw two katanas, one of which was stabbed down to his stomach and pierced her chest. The other was going through her stomach and piercing him on the chest. He sensed the blades being drawn. He didn't care about it at the moment, even though it hurt. His gaze was fixed on her body as it descended gradually toward the floor. He put her gently on the ground and swiftly grabbed her to stop it from happening. Ignoring the pain, Naruto looked down at her and yelled, "Yakumo," the blonde said, "Hang on," as he tried desperately to think of any healing jutsu he was aware of. The teenager heard, "Uzumaki Naruto," as his gaze swiftly fell upon a group of 5 Anbus encircling him and Yakumo. As one of them went on to say, "By decree of the Godem Hokage Shimura Danzo, you and Kurama Yakumo have been deemed as threats to the safety of the people of Konoha." His blood began to boil. The man then turned to face Yakumo and said, "By his decree Kurama Yakumo is sentenced to execution while Uzumaki Naruto is to be brought in and imprisoned." He wasn't paying attention as the heavens roared out and raindrops started to fall on everyone nearby. He was already staring back at Yakumo and her now dead body. He gazed at her while tiny raindrops landed on her. Her usual complexion had turned pale, and the warmth in her body had vanished. "Is there anything you could do, Eiko ne? Naruto?" His tenant didn't finish, so Naruto shook his head and turned to face the girl, who was smiling and slowly closing her eyes as she made a valiant effort to communicate with him. She coughed up blood, and he watched her. He saw the girl, using all of her remaining strength, put her bloodied hand on his cheek and say, "I love you, Naruto." The boy's eyes grew wide as he struggled to find the right words for a few seconds. He yelled, "Yakumo," as she closed her eyes for the first time. He didn't respond when someone genuinely expressed their love for him. He remained by her side in disbelief as a wave of feelings that he was unaware he had already experienced threatened to burst from his heart. It was too late. Even if he said it, she would no longer be able to hear him. She was dead already in the arms of the person she loved. Kurama Yakumo passed away smiling. Naruto slowly lamented his inability to respond in time as he simply gazed at her body. Not being able to respond to her with 4 straightforward words when it counted. Out of all the withered leaves, this was the only one that mattered. His first true companion, his dependable friend. All he wanted was for her to hear his response. Just those 4 words. The rain started to pour harder, soaking his body in cold droplets, and he whispered, "I love you too." It fell on a deaf ear. A nearby Anbus attempted to approach the blonde in order to apply a chakra seal, believing it was time to restrain him. Time abruptly slowed down at that point, and the Anbu were all cut to pieces before they even realized what had happened. The last thing they saw was a pair of strange blue eyes staring at them with a magenta ring in the center. As if he hadn't moved at all, Naruto was back by Yakumo's side in an instant, holding her body in his hands while he heard loud thuds coming from behind him. The clatter of falling flesh on the floor, but he was indifferent to them. He was unconcerned. Naruto experienced an emotion he had long forgotten and believed he had escaped for the first time in years. He didn't want to go through that again. Sadness and pain as he continued to curse the world and God for their cruelty while clinging to Yakumo's now dead body. The boy looked up in the heaves and cursed, tears that he had thought he had shed long ago now streaming from his eyes. In the Hidden Leaves village in the middle of the Tree Sea. Below the weeping heavens with his loved one's dead body in his arms. The teenager sobbed. That's exactly what happened. The murderer was really born consequences of the deeds of elderly men and women, remnants of a bygone era who unwittingly sealed their country's future. In retrospect, these trivial and haphazard actions had little to no historical significance. They were merely minor occurrences in the great span of time. But as time has gone on, the deeds or inactions of these men and women, no matter how minor, have finally come to light and will eventually be the responsibility of an entire nation. Namikaze Minato's sacrifice and its effects. The effects of the death of Uzumaki Kushina. The effects of the hatred of Konohagakure. Consequences of the vote cast by Kurama Murakumo. Sarutobi Hiruzen's decisions and their effects. The results of Jiraiya's disregard. The results of the inaction of Hakate Kakashi. Shimura Danzo's orders and their effects. Indeed, this is a story about consequences, and it features a teenager sobbing uncontrollably as he holds his beloved's lifeless body in the middle of a sea of trees. One of the great Toad Sage's visions is of a child of fate, a child who was predicted to either bring about the world's final demise or eternal salvation. Since the world had already made up its mind, it was time to deal with the fallout. The outskirts of Konoha. After glancing at the shrine of the Kurama family, Naruto said, "I'm sorry," and put a scroll in his pocket. The teenager looked at the name of the man he owed his life to and said in a genuinely contrite tone, "I owed my life to you, and in the end I caused the death of your daughter." He said dryly, recalling the incident that made him realize the truth when he sneaked into the old man's office and peeked at the forbidden scroll that night. He discovered a few documents that contained in-depth accounts of the Kurama clan. "I actually befriended her without even knowing she was your daughter," perhaps as the Hyuga said that it was an act of fate. He eyed the scroll containing her body in his pocket and said, "I'd also like to apologize. I know you would want her body to be buried beside you, but I just can't stomach burying her within the very same lands that ordered her death, so for that I apologize." Yakumo. He recalled Yakumo's final moments and said, "Now that I think about it, that was the first time you actually called me by my name," before shaking his head quickly because he knew he would have to cry again if he gave it any more thought. That was not something he could afford, not with Konoha on the verge of pursuing him. Holding Yakumo's mask in his hand, he turned away from the grave and said to himself, "I'm sorry." Again he muttered, "I owe so much to you and your daughter. Near the end, I promised to avenge your lives." The teenager then gave the mask in his hand a long look, and as usual, it was always grinning. The fool's mask. Laughing, the teenager, wearing the mask, remarked, "I wonder, would I ever truly smile like when I was with you again?" Yes, the smiling fool's mask. How appropriate for a man like him. It was still raining when Naruto looked up at the sky, and the pitter-patter of the rain trickled down his mask, giving the impression that he was still crying. As he felt multiple presences approaching his location, the soon-to-be missing Nin of Konoha closed his eyes from beneath the mask and shed a final tear. No more crying from now on. He was seen by the Konoha people as a demon who was determined to wreak havoc. For once, he felt compelled to share their opinions today. He heard 8 or 9 ninjas land around him with multiple thuds. "Uzumaki Naruto," he heard someone pronounce. "You are to come with us." And his first victims were these people. The newborn killer brings down the first of many victims. Satsujin. A killer's birth office of the Hokage. The contents of a scroll brought by one of his subordinates, who was part of the first group he sent to capture the Kyuubi brat and kill the Kurama heiress, shocked the old war hawk, and Shimura Danzo scowled as he finished reading it while seated at his desk. If he was able to massacre an entire Anbu team, it seems that he had greatly underestimated the boy. Since it was well known that he was a man who rarely displayed any emotion, the two people around him were taken aback when they saw his frown. Therefore, when a man like him frowned, it indicated that something was amiss and that things were not going as planned. "Is there something troubling you?" Homura asked. Sitting in a wooden chair a short distance from the Hokage's desk, his old teammate Kaharu was seated next to him, and she was also looking at the recently elected Godem Hokage with a worried expression on her face. "Uzumaki Naruto," Danzo said, repeating his examination of the scroll to make sure it contained the correct information, "has escaped." Kaharu, who was equally as shocked and perplexed as a certain Shimura Danzo, who simply concealed it better, exclaimed, "What? How is that even possible? Didn't you send a whole team of Anbu to detain him?" "Do not panic, Kaharu. How about the Kurama heir? Was she at least taken care of?" The Godem nodded to Homura. "Yes, and as planned her death will be blamed upon Uzumaki Naruto, and as for how the boy escaped our grasps, it appears that the boy has been holding back more than he let on." Kaharu swallowed, remembering the sensation of the very repulsive creature that inhabits the boy's body. Could it be that he's using that monster's chakra? No. The report says that the boy took down most of the Anbu assigned to capture him with nothing but his Tonto. Homura was forced to scoff this time at the idea of a newly promoted Chunin eliminating a group of extremely talented Anbu, saying, "Preposterous, I am sure he's using that thing's chakra." The Godem Hokage snapped his fingers and called 3 of his root Anbu into the room, and Danzo shook his head. "Homura, you are forgetting one of the lessons Tobirama-sensei taught all of us," he said. Together, the 3 said, "Hi Danzo-sama?" The first of the 3 was indicated by the root leader. "I want you to take 5 teams of root Anbu and order you to track down Uzumaki Naruto, and as well as to send your summons to me detailing the direction of his travel. Also, I do not care if the boy loses a limb. I want him back alive so we may extract the Kyuubi from him, understand?" The Anbu uttered the words, "Hi Danzo-sama," before vanishing in a whirl of foliage. "You," Danzo said, gesturing to the second Anbu, "I want you to alert our hunter nins as well as all the available Konoha shinobi or those returning from their missions to assist with the capture of Uzumaki Naruto. Contact Suna as well and see if they can provide any backup." "Hi Danzo-sama," the root worker said, disappearing in a whirlpool of leaves, just like the first. "Your orders?" inquired the final Anbu. "Take off your mask." "Hi Danzo-sama," said the final Anbu, removing his mask to reveal the face of a pale teenager with short black hair that matched his black eyes. As he motioned for the young root Anbu to come closer, Danzo said, "Sai, I want you to follow the first group and act as their fail-safe. You are to eliminate any traces of their existence if they fail their mission, after which you are to follow Uzumaki Naruto and apprehend him if possible." The young Anbu obediently followed his instructions. As he handed the young root operative a piece of paper bearing an intrinsic seal, a suppression seal created to stifle a biju's power, the man added, "Take this and use it on Uzumaki if necessary." "Hi, is that all Danzo-sama? If it so happens that uncertain events prevent you from obtaining the boy's body, then you are to report back to me. Now go." Sai said, "Hi," before disappearing in a whirlpool of black ink. Kohaku, who believed Danzo might have gone overboard, asked, "Aren't you going overboard?" But Homura was asking a different question. "What was the lesson that you were talking about earlier?" The Godem allowed a tiny smile to slowly appear on his face and turned his head to face the 2 elders. "Never underestimate your opponent." Satsujin. A killer's birth in the vicinity of Hai no Kuni. The teenager ran towards Otto, jumping from tree to tree with blinding speed. For the time being, he had to tell his pursuers that he was heading to Orochimaru and set up a false trail that would eventually lead them to try to find the deranged Sennin and the weapon that was rightfully Konoha's. Although he didn't particularly dislike the snake, this was his best chance of completely vanishing. Konoha had little to no control over Otto's boundaries, so he won't know if he simply disappeared for no apparent reason in order to travel to his true destination and remain anonymous. He was certain that a particular clan, which was said to reside in a particular village, would be able to help him become stronger than he currently was. They could wait until he came down to exact his revenge because, although he was aware of his strength, it was still insufficient to overthrow one of the 5 great nations because he lacked the resources, money, power, information, and connections. The teenager whispered, "Shimura Danzo," as he kept his blue eyes on his surroundings. As he unlocked the Tonto concealed in his left arm, he was able to thwart multiple kunais that were aiming to skewer him to death. I will make sure to kill you last. I will make sure to make you watch as the village you love the most burn to the ground, he continued. Then a number of black-clad figures with white masks surrounded the lone Jinchuriki, the group's leader, who was probably one of them, said, "We will only ask once more, Uzumaki Naruto, come with us peacefully. I will think about it if you answer one question for me. If it is under my jurisdiction, then I shall answer it. Why was Yakumo killed? For the sake of Konoha, of course. Why? Because she was a monster just like you or Uzumaki." The teenager closed his eyes and said, "I see." The leader signaled to his accomplices to restrain the young Uzumaki, believing it to be a sign of the boy's surrender. The teen's eyes opened again, this time with a magenta ring in the center and an unnatural shade of blue in place of the blue ones that had been there before the two rude Anbu's hands could even reach Naruto's body. They didn't know to the teenager, that is again, the world grew brittle. The teenager moved at a pace that was suitable for someone who had been trained by both a Biju and a Sannin. Albeit briefly, and he cut down, no, he dissected, the two Anbu who dared to come near him with ease. The teen vanished in a blur of speed before the Anbus could even recover from their shock, demonstrating once more that he was related to the man who was once thought to be the fastest of the elemental nations. The teen appeared impassively behind one of the rude Anbus in the tree that was the furthest away from the group, and a scream of agony and horror reverberated throughout the forest before killing him by slashing him in the jugular and causing his body to fall to the ground lifelessly like a puppet with its strings severed. The teenager gazed with indifference at the now mutilated Anbu as he gripped his stump of an arm. How appropriate the Anbus that surrounded him by that point had already reacted and left their positions, throwing weapons, jutsu, shurikens, and kunais at him. As he kicked off the tree and ran in the direction of the closest rude operative, the teenager squatted on top of the tree branch and said, "Senso, flash run." Without emotion, many people thought the teenager had vanished, but the trained eyes of the Anbus saw him moving at a speed that was too fast for them to react to, moving in a yellow blur that resembled his father, and in an instant, the young blonde took one Anbu's life. It was simple. Even though they were the so-called Konoha elites, they were relatively simple to eliminate. However, because of his eyes, they could be cut down as long as they're there. As he approached another Anbu, the blonde kicked off the ground, his eyes still flashing strangely like the previous ones. This one attempted to defend himself with their tanto, but the teen easily cut through both his head and tanto. He then sliced through a large fire dragon that another Anbu had sent him while he was still holding his tanto. Ordinarily, the idea of cutting through a jutsu would have made him wince in agony, but for the moment, it made no difference. Not when the agony he experienced in his chest outweighed any potential physical harm. The teenager disappeared, channeling chakra toward his feet, then resurfaced behind the Kaden with Anbu. He questioned the astonished Anbu, "Are you scared?" He drew his tanto and spun around, only to be greeted by a large wooden log in place of the masked killer. "No, I am not scared. I do not fear death, for I will not die today, demon spawn," the man exclaimed. "Fool, you should be scared of death. Everything that is alive eventually comes to an end." His strength was evidence of that. He is the one with the greatest understanding of death, the fragility of life, existence, and this world itself are all things he is aware of. Even the trained Anbu's eyes could not keep up with the tanto in his hand as it blurred at an unfathomable speed. "Because," the teenager said. "Right now, the Anbu lost all of his limbs," he went on to say. "I am death," as he stabbed the man in the forehead with his tanto, essentially ending his life. Ignoring the weariness that was building inside his body, he said, "And I will make sure Konoha will learn of that one day," before taking off and disappearing in a burst of speed once more to deal with his remaining pursuers. He was the end's messenger, someone who has the ability to kill with his own hands. Now was the ideal moment for him to wield his scythe and wreak havoc on his victims, for he has turned into death, the destroyed of worlds. Satsujin. A killer's birth somewhere near the Oto borders in Hai no Kuni. As he read the scroll that a bird summoned to him, one Uchiha Sasuke's eyes widened in shock and disbelief before his features went pale. The rowdy Kiba Inuzuka looked impatiently at the squad leader for their mission and said, "Oi Sasuke, what are you spacing out for?" As he nibbled on the contents of his bag of chips, Shoji remarked, "It must be whatever it was written on that scroll." "We have a new mission." "Oh, what is it?" Kiba inquired. As he showed his teammates the scroll, the teenager with the raven hair declared, "We are to assist in the capture of one Uzumaki Naruto. We are to capture him alive and bring him back to Konoha, for the murder of the Kurama clan heiress, Kurama Yakumo. There is also a repost saying that he is heading towards Otogakure." Kiba said, "Otogakure? Hey, aren't we near that area?" Neji stated, "Only a few hours away actually. This must be fate, a traitor and murderer. I knew there was something wrong with him, Neji muttered, crossing his arms over his chest. Shoji, who for once put down his chips, remarked, I wonder why Naruto would do something like that. He doesn't seem like that type of guy. On the other hand, Shikamaru appeared confused as his mind raced. This was not Naruto. In addition to the fact that Yakumo was Naruto's best friend, he knew from their games of shogi that the blonde shinobi was calm and calculating and wouldn't do anything without cause. It was also unlikely that he would have killed her in cold blood, like the scroll in a tale. Mendokusai, the boy added, turning to face Sasuke. The reports said he was headed towards Otogakure. What do you want to do? Uchiha concluded by saying, we go after him, in an emotionless and neutral tone. Mendokusai was all Shikamaru could say as he and the other members of the team leapt up the closest tree and then ran toward the Otogakure border. He was confident that if they continued at this rate, they would eventually catch up to the blonde. Satsujin. A killer's birth in the vicinity of Oto's borders. A certain blonde shinobi leapt from one tree's branch onto another. At that point, his body could only be described as painful. When the Anbus began to fight back, he was immediately shown why they were the best the village had to offer, even though he had initially been successful in taking them by surprise and eliminating a few of them. His cause was further hampered by the fact that they had backup. Before he deactivated his Magen and left their corpses in the middle of that now bloodied forest, which would have made the tyrant Yagura shudder in disgust at the sight of its state of pure gore and horror, he was positive that all of them were dead, even though he was unsure of how much time he had spent fending them off. His body was covered in cuts and bruises. His right arm was burned and singed after being grazed by a fireball. He had a few crack ribs from a few lucky kicks and punches, and his leg muscles were nearly torn to shreds from his overuse of senso, reminding the blonde that he has not yet fully mastered the technique. Nevertheless, he did not emerge from the battle unscathed, and he could feel his once enormous reserves had decreased to a pitiful 25% of what they had been. As he was now, he wouldn't even be able to withstand another attack from about a dozen of those Anbu. Not when they most likely knew the extent of his skills. Soon after, he failed to kill the Anbus who were sending messages back to Konoha, and he cursed inwardly. As he attempted to get in touch with his tenant, the legendary Kyuubi Eiko, the teenager snapped out of his reverie and shook his head. He thought, Ane, are you here? But the Biju remained silent. He called out again, Ane, but she didn't respond. Did she get hurt? She was most likely still there because his wounds were still healing, but why didn't she respond? The teen briefly considered closing his mind in order to communicate with his tenant by exploring his inner world, but the circumstances prevented him from doing so. With an army of ninjas and special ops from one of the 5 great nations pursuing his ass, sitting down to mediate was undoubtedly a bad idea. In reference to the 5 great nations, it seems that Suna made the decision to support their allies. The teenager launched himself from a different tree and flew through the air, landing on a wide clearing where 3 shinobi he already knew were among the Suna nins waiting for him. The sandy blonde-haired Kunoichi, wearing a dark blue skirt and a purple blouse, snorted when Naruto joked, Hey makeup boy, I see you still wearing your cat pajamas in broad daylight. Kankuro screamed out loud, trying to restrain himself from slugging the blonde directly into his face. Kami, damn it, I told you before, this is not fucking makeup, it's fucking war paint. Gaara, who was standing between his siblings, folded his arms across his chest and remarked, You look like crap. Hey, I had a rough day. Love the new clothes by the way. Thank you for your compliment, said Gaara, who was actually sporting a brand new pair of long-sleeved overalls with an uptight collar and a reddish-brownish color. So, Naruto began, clutching his tanto, which was still unsheathed and by this point crusted with the blood of the people he had slain during his rampage through the high no Kuni forests. Are you 3 going against me as well? With her hands on her waist, Tamari eyed an obviously enraged Kankuro and said, We're not really here to fight. Well, at least not all of us, since Kankuro here is still sore after losing so easily to you. Then why are you here? I don't really have all day. I am here to offer you a place in Suna, said Gaara as he moved forward. From beneath his mask, Naruto's eyes actually widened in surprise. What? He asked. I said you can come to Suna. I heard of what has occurred and figured that you would need a place to hide yourself from Konoha. Why? In all honesty, Gaara's straightforward response left Naruto speechless. Because we're friends, and as you said, us Jinchuriki have to look out for each other. Naruto shocked the Suna siblings by saying, Sorry but no. Why? Gaara inquired. As you said, us Jinchuriki need to look out for each other. By not joining Suna, I am looking out for you, my friend. Kankuro asked the blonde, somewhat demanding that he explain why he so readily turned down their brother's invitation. What do you mean? He asked. The moment Konoha finds out that I am hiding in Suna, they will immediately declare war on your nation since your country has already been weakened because of the failed invasion. If Konoha were to attack, well, you know what would happen. Closed-eyed, the red-haired Jinchuriki said, I see, very well, I am sorry for not being help you. It's the thought that counts, Gaara. Sorry Gaara, but I know where I need to go. To Orochimaru. As two exact replicas of himself materialized next to him, Naruto shook his head and said, no, there is somewhere else I need to be. As the two rather beat-up clones flashed and reappeared behind Temari and Kankuro, he added, I'm sorry, but I have to make it at least look convincing so Konoha wouldn't have thought that you guys just let me pass. Wah! Was all that came out of Temari's mouth as the clone sliced her neck, knocking her unconscious, then laid her down gently on the ground and, to make it look more realistic, slashed at her unconscious form with a kunai. As the clone assigned to him stomped down on him with joy, Kankuro, on the other hand, was lying on the ground in a fetal position defensively, saying, oh, I never agreed to this. Get up, make-up boy, the clone said. Sorry about, my clones seem to hate Kankuro for some reason, then again it might be my subconsciousness acting up. As the sand dripped threateningly from the gourd in his back, Gaara said, I see, although I must warn you that this should be the last time you hurt my siblings. I promise not to hurt Temari-chan ever again. Gaara's impassive green eyes simply gazed at him. His addition of, and Kankuro, caused the redhead to nod in agreement. Gaara closed his eyes and said, then I hope to see you again someday, my friend. After giving Gaara one final look, Naruto leapt to his feet and ran in the direction of the Suna-nin, but as he went past the Suna-nin, the murderer muttered his own goodbyes to the once mad Jinchuriki who was now his friend as his hands moved swiftly enough to slit Gaara's neck before his sand could react. He said, for your sake, hope that you never see me again, Gaara, goodbye. Satsujin. The inception of a murderous scene. A proverb once predicted that a single, inconsequential nail would have far-reaching consequences, causing an entire kingdom to lose a war and fundamentally altering the course of history. However, there are some events that, in spite of this proverbial nail that ties together the very fabric of time and space, as well as ideas like fate and destiny, were simply meant to happen. The conclusion of Satsujin. The birth of a killer. The End Valley play the immortal game 2 Steps from Hell. Before reaching the opposite side of the vast valley, the masked shinobi leapt off the ground and landed on top of the river, channeling what little chakra remained to his legs. Almost there, he said, perched atop the statue of Uchiha Madara, and took a single step toward Otto's edge before stopping suddenly because he felt several people around him, one of whom had just landed directly behind him. When someone landed on top of the head of the other statue, the statue of Senjua Hiroshima, the Shodem of Konoha, he could hear the loud thud. The familiar voice of his pursuer asked in a tone that was a mix of confusion and rage, why Naruto? Naruto turned to face the raven-haired Uchiha in front of him and asked, why what Uchiha? Wearing his new Chunin vest over the same black outfit he had worn for the exams, the final Uchiha stood tall. Why did you kill Yakumo? Sasuke yelled, glaring at the Uzumaki as he used his Dujutsu. Before glaring back at the Uchiha, Naruto froze in place and his eyes turned an odd shade of blue with a ring of magenta. Naruto gripped his tanto tighter in his hand and asked in an eerily cold voice, his anger barely contained, what, did you say? Sasuke screamed, you killed her, and swiftly performed a few hand seals before shooting the blonde with a huge ball of flame. When Naruto saw one line running down the center of the ball of flaming death, his eyes flashed an unearthly blue, but he didn't respond because he was too angry to do so. The blonde gripped the handle of his tanto and carefully applied Futon chakra to the blade, extending its reach until it resembled a real katana. Then, he used the blade to cut the jutsu in the middle, cleaving it in half as the two pieces of the great fireball passed the Jinchuriki without incident. At that moment, additional members of what appeared to be the Ravenette's team appeared next to him, carrying the faces of 2 opponents he had previously vanquished as well as a few others he had no issue with for lack of a better term. Shikamaru inquired, are you going to Orochimaru? What if I say yes? I'm sorry, but we can't allow that. The Godem Hokage has already decreed that you are to be captured and brought back to Konoha. The shinobi in the mask cocked his head sideways. Because I killed Yakumo? No, because it's orders, as much as he wanted to run over the river and tear the Uchiha's throat out of his body for accusing him of killing Yakumo, the blonde said. I see. After giving them a chilly look before turning around, he simply didn't have chakra to waste on these people. He began to leave, saying, if you want to go after me, then fine, but I'll tell you this. The moment you guys go after me, I will not hesitate to kill you. Sasuke yelled, what, are you just going to run away? "You fucking murderer. How can you kill your friend?" said Kiba. In contrast, Neji had just activated his Byakugan as he prepared for the blonde's reaction to the Inuzuka and Uchiha's provocations. He was no fool and was aware that if he provoked the blonde, he might either ignore them or snap at them for his part. He was getting ready for the latter. Shikamaru and Choji, on the other hand, were merely staring at the blonde, but it appeared that they were both prepared to act when necessary. The blonde walked away, still ignoring them. "Come back here, you monster." Naruto froze as a series of memories flooded his mind for the second time in a few seconds. "You demon brat. You monster, you killed my husband. She was monster just like you." The murderer was on the verge of hatred and rage when something suddenly snapped inside his head. Yes, he could just walk away because he was sure he could outrun the group even if he wasn't feeling his best, but the Uchiha had to go too far. As he swiftly turned around and glared at the group from beneath his perpetually smiling mask, Naruto let out a roar of laughter that sent shivers down the Konoha nin's spine. "You could say I killed her," he said, looking at Sasuke in a condescending way that the teenager could not see through his mask. He would be happy to play with them before departing if they wanted to fight, much like how your brother killed off your entire clan. The Ravenet had already run headlong across the river toward the obviously superior, albeit likely exhausted and wounded, ninja before Shikamaru could even utter the words, "Don't fall for it, Sasuke." Sasuke produced a kunai and threw it at Naruto, who easily deflected the metallic projectile with his tanto before moving aside to avoid a Chunin punch that was intended for his head. After taking one step in the direction of the Uchiha, the blonde Uzumaki swung his elbow out and struck the teenager squarely in the chest. The boy stumbled back from the blow and tried to kick him in the head to end the fight, but he jumped. To avoid two fierce human-sized spinning bullets that tried to strike his already injured body, Naruto halted the kick in mid-air and spun his body around. Then, as Choji's enormous fist struck his body, forcing him to cross his arms over his chest, he crashed into a smirking Hyuga in his Hake Rokuhuion Sho. 8 trigrams 64 palms, stance. "You are within the range of my divination. Futon. Daitapa, wind release. Great breakthrough," he screamed as he launched forward a blast of wind that smashed against the Hyuga, abruptly ending any plans he had to perform his clan's jutsu. "Shit," the blonde said as he resealed his tanto before hurriedly going through some hand seals. The teenager used what little he had left to fire off another Daitapa, this time letting the force of the blow push his body in the direction of the lake that developed beneath the valley. Staring at the descending figures of the other teenagers who had chosen to capture him, the masked teen stood motionless atop the body of water, channeling chakra in his feet. Kaden. Karyu Dai Enden, fire release. Fire Dragon Great Flame Bullet. Sasuke screamed as he let out several enormous fire-breathing dragons, all of which flew in Naruto's direction. As he had to use Senso to flash around and avoid the dragons, the masked teen clicked his tongue and said, "Tisk." However, Naruto failed to consider that the dragon's collision with the lake's cold surface created a warm blanket of steam that covered the entire area. As he barely avoided being incapacitated by Kiba and Akamaru drilling through the steamy air again, Naruto scowled from beneath his mask. The teen took a few steps back and started to blow away the steam with one of his futon jutsu by going through some hand seals. However, he stopped midway through because the Hyuga blazed out of the steam eyes and threw a series of quick, accurate pokes that closed off a number of tenketsu points on the teen's right shoulder, making it useless. With his remaining foot firmly planted on the water's surface, the teenager gritted his teeth and managed to knee the Hyuga in the stomach. Naruto then extended his leg to kick the Hyuga, causing the Juken user to cough up blood as the drill hit his stomach. As he cocked his left hand back and pulled his leg away, Naruto said, "Fate decrees that you die today, Hyuga." He then thrusted it towards the teen's chest in a knife hand. But an unholy force held him back before he could murder the teenager. The masked murderer heard the words, "Kagemain no Jutsu, shadow imitation technique. Success," from somewhere in the steam before he was struck by a massive ball of human flesh that appeared out of nowhere and blindsided the blonde. Nikuden Sensha, human bullet tank. After crashing into the lake's surface and rolling around on it, Naruto heard the sound and eventually sank beneath the icy water. Their jutsu is so painful that it's absurd. Damn Akamichis. The teenager ignored the cold water seeping through his wounds, which made them sting before becoming numb, and closed his eyes. Naruto opened his eyes and looked up at the bright surface, noting multiple footsteps. "They're highly organized. They're working well together despite not normally being in the same team," he said. "Shikamaru," he muttered, remembering how that damned shadow jutsu had caught him. That clarified a lot. They gave an explanation of why they were fighting hard. Nara IQ is never something that should be taken lightly. The teenager closed his eyes and calculated that he had only about 20% of his chakra remaining while he was going through some one-handed hand seals. The teenager whispered, "Still enough," as he made a shadow clone that seized him and threw him up towards the surface with all of its strength before dispelling. The teenager inhaled deeply as he shot out of the lake and into the air. Watching the group's shocked expressions, the teenager exhaled a huge ball of fire shaped like a fox and whispered, "Kaden. Kitsune Dai Hadama, fire release. Fox giant ball of fire." In front of his fellow Konoha nin, the Uchiha's eyes flashed red, and he swiftly shot an equally large ball of fire in the direction of the blonde's own. "Kaden. Gokakyu no Jutsu, fire release, great fireball." The two jutsu clashed, forming what appeared to be a tiny sun in the middle of the valley, and then it exploded, sending a powerful shockwave that easily blew away the warm steam, and some of the genin, Kiba and Choji, who were caught off guard. The two cheered, "Wah, woo," as they rolled around the lake's surface. Shikamaru turned to face his best friend and said, "Choji, are you alright?" But his eyes widened as he felt pain in his middle. "Wah," he exclaimed in surprise as he looked down and saw the masked blonde's knife hand in his stomach. "This is nothing personal, Shikamaru, but I can't have you coming up with any more strategies." Blood trickled from the Nara's mouth as he said, "Tisk, troublesome as always, Naruto," before his body collapsed and fell face first into the lake. As he turned around, Naruto whispered, "When the brain falls, the rest of the body will follow," and saw an angry Choji running recklessly towards him. Behind the big-boned teen were none other than Kiba and Akamaru, a slightly limping Neji, and an enraged Sasuke. As Choji roared out, "Nikuden Sensha, human bullet tank," and then changed back into a big ball of flesh that rolled in the direction of the blonde, the murderer steadied himself by channeling chakra to his arms and legs. From beneath his mask, the teenager smirked and held out his left hand to the side, causing a tiny ball of pure chakra to form around it. Kiba instantly yelled for Choji to stop, but it was too late. As the killer trusted the sphere to guide the Akamichi, his cold blue eyes locked onto the target's massive body. Rasengan, spiraling sphere. The revolving mass of flesh contrasts with a spiraling sphere of pure compressed chakra. It was clear who had won. The Akamichi's massive body abruptly deflated, revealing Choji with his shirt ripped off and a large spiral mark on his chest. Naruto stood with his left hand extended towards Choji's large frame until the boy ceased rolling. His eyes rolled to the back of his head, his mouth hanging wide open, and he was either unconscious or worse, dead. "Two down," the killer said sarcastically as he threw the Akamichi's lifeless body aside, retreated a few paces, and then ducked to avoid a series of punches from Kiba and an overhead kick from Sasuke. The masked teenager's left hand then grabbed the Uchiha's leg before throwing him in the direction of the approaching Neji. "Is this your best option?" As Kiba and his clone, thanks to Akamaru, started fighting him with taijutsu, Naruto laughed, "I'm bleeding all over my body. My legs are killing me. My right arm is mostly useless thanks to the Hyuga, and I'm running on less than 1/4 of my tanks, and I'm still kicking your collective asses. Stop talking. Your taijutsu sucks, Kiba. You call yourself the heir to the Inuzuka clan when you can't even throw a decent punch. Hell, your sister probably throws a better punch than you." Kiba yelled as he threw multiple that the blonde easily avoided. The masked teenager taunted, "Why isn't she the heiress?" "I don't know." He gladly returned one of the Inuzuka's overextended punches with one of his own, striking Kiba in the face and breaking both his nose and lip. "That's how a punch is delivered," screamed Naruto as he spun around and kicked the other Kiba squarely in the middle, causing a puff of smoke to surround it and reveal that it was Akamaru. Following his attack, the blonde kneed Kiba in the face, causing his body to slack back. "Then again, what could I expect from a clan of dog humpers?" he said, punching Kiba in the chest, sending the teen and his pet crashing back towards the statue of the Shodem Hokage. He then twisted his body and kicked the small dog directly at its owner, smashing its small white body against the teen's stomach, causing him to lurch forward in agony. "Whose turn is it then?" Looking at a panting Neji and a somewhat worn-out Sasuke, Naruto remarked, "I really don't have all day here. Wait, don't you two tell me you're tired?" In an attempt to conceal the fact that he was most likely in worse shape than the two of them, he asked. "Stop talking. You're going to lose here today," Neji said, maintaining his clan's taijutsu stance. "HN," spoke Sasuke as he pulled 10 shurikens from his pockets and hurled them all at the shinobi with the blue eyes. Before channeling chakra to his legs and charging towards the two Konoha shinobi, Naruto yelled, "Futon! Daitapa!" and blew out another wave of highly pressurized wind to blow away the incoming ninja stars. He then created a single cage bunshin and gave it instructions to deal with Sasuke while he finished off the Hyuga. Naruto said, I really hope you put up a better fight this time, Hyuga, as he threw a low kick that the Hyuga deftly sidestepped before he countered by abruptly extending his middle and index fingers in an effort to cut off some of the blonde's tenketsu. Tisk. Naruto clicked his tongue again as two of the Hyuga's blows landed, snagging 2 points close to his stomach. Damn, he was already feeling lethargic and exhausted. To the Hyuga's surprise, the Uzumaki merely slapped his hand away before punching the Hyuga in the face in retaliation. I learn from my defeats, Neji said, putting his left hand palm first towards the blonde's chest. As he tilted his head towards Kiba, Naruto said, "No, you didn't. If you did, you would have used some ninjutsu, but alas, still the same tricks. You Hyugas really are one-trick ponies, much like Dogboy over there." He then swayed his upper body back to avoid another attempt to close off his tenkatsu. "Predictable," he said, looking at the Hyuga's extended arm, and with exact timing, the masked shinobi smashed the arm between his knee and elbow. Now that I think about it, almost all of a Hyuga's taijutsu is dependent on their hands. Hey Neji, can you tell me how you're going to beat me with one good hand? The sound of bone snapping was followed by the Hyuga's agonized cries, which, for some strange reason, were music to his ears. Neji didn't respond. Instead, the clan's supposed prodigy roared loudly before recklessly going after the teen's heart with the blonde palm facing it, just like Choji had done moments before. The Hyuga then met the same end as the Akamichi. To give me the impression of false hope, the Uzumaki let the Hyuga's open palm nearly strike his heart before slapping the Hyuga's hand away again. Too bad, Naruto whispered as he trusted a knife hand over the white-eyed teen's shoulder, piercing it and causing another yell of pain. The blonde then tripped the Hyuga off balance, elbowed him in the cheek, and then lashed out his entire arm, punching Neji in the face, causing the teen to collapse under the force of the blow. That was the end of Neji's fight, if there was such a thing. "One to go," he said, glancing at Sasuke, who was battling his clone. "Now what to do with this one?" "What to do," he said, trying to come up with a plan to play with the Uchiha before he kills the Chunin and tries to survive. If it weren't for him abruptly having to use Senso to dodge a big white paw that attempted to crash into his body, at least he tried. "Damn it, Kami!" Naruto cursed as he reappeared a few meters away from the beast that attempted to slay him. The beast was a big, two-headed dog that resembled Akamaru, albeit a furious one, he might add. Naruto muttered, "Oh the mutt. Well, this is a surprise, a bigger dog," as he had to use Senso. Flash run. Once more to vanish in a burst of speed in order to escape the mad beast's charge. Naruto didn't need to be a genius to realize that his legs had reached their limit. At most, he could afford one or two more before his muscles were literally torn to shreds. This is the price he pays for overusing a technique he hasn't fully mastered. As soon as he appeared far from the furious beast, he started to cringe in pain and felt the need to either sit down and grab his legs or scream out. The beast glared at Naruto, seemingly prepared to bite his head off, and roared out again, opening its salivating mouths. It was an obvious message. Kiba desired to murder him. If so, he was happy to comply. Naruto made another ball of chakra with his right hand by his side. He likely only had one or two of these babies left, but he needed at least one to defeat this mutt. "Do you want to play ball, boy?" As the spiraling sphere grew to a size at least equal to a human body, the teenager asked. Instead of responding, the dog-wolf creature leapt into the air and contorted its body in a well-known move, albeit a massively enhanced version of the Gatsuga, fang-passing Fant. The murderer uttered the words, "This is going to hurt like hell," as he waited until the very last moment before using Senso. Flash run. To reappear next to the furious beast with a huge ball of chakra in hand. Udama Rasengan, big ball spiraling sphere. He screamed as he smashed the large sphere directly at the beast's body, forcing it to stop rotating and dispelling the enormous transformation that separated Kiba and Akamaru, both of whom fell beneath the lake. The masked shinobi snorted as he turned his head towards the last person in the valley still conscious, aside from himself, and watched Kiba and Akamaru's bodies float face up in the water before receiving the memories from his now dispelled clone. "New look, same tricks, try next time, boy," he said. "Well, you surprised me. I never imagined you could beat one of my clones. Well done, Sasuke. Now that it's just the two of us, Sasuke, would you mind saying what you called me earlier again?" "You traitor, I called you a murderer. How is that possible? How could you harm Yakumo like that?" As he charged at the weary blonde, the Ravenet exclaimed. "I find it funny that you call me a traitor," Naruto remarked, focusing most of his attention on dodging the teen's kicks and punches. Have they not realized that, in terms of taijutsu, all of them were pointless against him? The teenager shook his head, took advantage of one of the Uchiha's openings, and immediately stomped on the boy's foot. "First of all, Sasuke, I'm sure that if someone were to offer to give you the power to kill your brother you'd leave Konoha in a heartbeat, he said, attempting to punch the Uchiha, but the teen dodged the blow and pulled out a single kunai with an explosion tag, which he threw at the killer. With a sly smile, Naruto grabbed the kunai with his left hand, swiftly removed the explosive tag, and threw it far behind him. Boom! What on earth are you discussing? Naruto simply twirled the kunai he took from Sasuke in hand before using it to block the incoming barrage of shurikens in response to Sasuke's question as he began tossing the blonde with shurikens. Naruto held the kunai in reverse grip before kicking off the lake's surface and charging towards Sasuke. I'm saying that you call me a traitor, but you yourself have a good likelihood of betraying Konoha. Probably to join Orochimaru. Hell, the snake probably tried to do that but he failed. After removing his own kunai, the Uchiha charged at the blonde, who met him halfway through. The sound of steel on steel reverberated throughout the room as the two clashed their blades with such force that sparks flew from them. As he felt himself being pushed back, Sasuke said, I'll admit that I'll do everything I can to get strong, but he had never considered leaving Konoha. Why would I go? Everything I need is right here. A whole clan vault full of scrolls containing thousands of jutsus, and a good teacher in Kakashi. How could I possibly leave? You're still weak. The masked shinobi threw the kunai at Sasuke, forcing the teen to block the blow, diverting his attention from the sudden charge of the blonde, because despite all that, Naruto tightened his hold on the kunai and overpowered Sasuke's blow, briefly stunning the teen and allowing the blonde to land a kick right in the Uchiha's stomach, pushing the teen back. Entry in dynamic. The blonde screamed as his foot made contact with the Uchiha's face, then kicked the teenager off the face, flipping through the air and landing a few meters away. The Uchiha gave him a fierce look, but he ignored it and continued, Oh, and about being called a murdered. We're shinobi, Sasuke, we all live to murder, in a condescending tone. Hell, you live so that you could kill Itachi-san in the future, he added. However, given that we are all killers, wouldn't that make your brother one of the greatest shinobi ever? He smirked from under his mask as he watched Sasuke extinguish another massive fireball in the distance, saying, Since he killed every single member of your clan like they were insignificant insects, which they probably were. After passing through a few hand seals, the blonde shinobi launched his own fireball, which was so large that it easily engulfed the Uchiha inside it before soaring in the direction of the Uchiha, who just managed to avoid it in time. As he backflipped through the air several times to avoid several kunai, thanks to the recently promoted Uchiha, he said, Damn, you really need a lot of work if you want to kill Itachi. Hell, I'm closer at killing him as I am right now. And lastly, he glared at Sasuke as he used his own dujutsu for a single second, giving the Uchiha the impression that someone was looking into his life and at his own frailty. You have no right to say her name, never ever say her name again, Konoha scum, the blonde said as he ran in the direction of the Uchiha, oblivious to the pain in his legs. Sasuke turned to the left of the masked teen's attack and threw his own punch, which landed on the teen's mask, just as the teen was about to stab the Uchiha in the chest with a knife he had thrown with his left hand. Naruto winced in agony as he was abruptly put on the defensive by an attack from the Uchiha. The Ravenet was yelling a battle cry as he continued to attack with punches, kicks, chops, thrusts, stomps, and even a headbutt. As he attempted to use his specialized counterattacks, the blue-eyed killer snarled beneath his mask, but the teenager managed to avoid most of them. It felt like he was moving in water because his body felt so heavy. By now, he ought to have eliminated the Uchiha. Why aren't you using your Tanto? Naruto asked, raising his right hand to block a kick from Sasuke that sent him skidding back through the lake as he charged at Naruto again. The Uchiha asked. My hands and legs are enough, or haven't you noticed me taking down all of your teammates? Naruto responded. I don't need to use my Tanto against you. He lightly misled the Uchiha with a jab that could smash his knee on the teen's ribs, forcing the Ravenet to back away. In order to give his wounds time to heal, Naruto took a deep breath and tried to think of something. Oh, and did I mention that I met your brother on my last mission? What? Sasuke's eyes widened. Told me he was looking for me, that he needed me to come with him. I told him to fuck off. We even fought, before he ran away. The teenager laughed. Not even one word about his dear brother Sasuke. You're telling lies. How are you doing if you met him? Even though you're strong, I'm sure he can kill you. Nope. I killed his partner after catching him off guard. If Jiraiya had arrived sooner, I would have also killed your brother and taken away your entire reason for existing for laughs and shit. I would have loved to kill Itachi. Oh, the Uchiha's frown was so precious. What's the reason behind this? Sasuke inquired. What are you saying? You haven't responded yet. Why are you leaving Konoha? Why did you kill Yakumo? And why are you even attacking us? We are your friends, right? Your supporters? No, you aren't my only attachment to Konoha died with Yakumo, Kiba and Neji. They are my enemies. Shikamaru and Choji are merely acquaintances, and you Sasuke, I hate you. Why, aren't we teammates? Sasuke asked, his eyes widening again. I viewed you as a competitor. A one-sided rivalry. To me you were nothing more than an annoyance. Naruto laughed. I only made an effort to work with you or teach you anything because Yakumo persuaded me to. You know why I really hate you? Sasuke spent most of your time scowling and being an emo, thinking that you have had it worse your whole life. Then you just had to think you were a god-sent blessing to the world just because of your bloodline, Naruto thought as he finally caught his breath again. This is probably good enough. Naruto launched himself at Sasuke, taking the teenager by surprise and successfully executing a cross-chop over his body. Tell me, Sasuke, have you ever been so starved that you were essentially dead? He attempted to strike the Ravenet in the chest, but she blocked him by crossing his arms over his chest just in time. Have you ever gotten to the point where you genuinely consumed tainted food that someone else gave you? The blonde pushed the teenager farther away with a powerful punch that struck Sasuke's guard after he withdrew his fist. Have you ever experienced frequent beatings by a mob due to some half-assed prejudice stemming from an uncontrollable event? As the masked shinobi swiftly slapped it out of the teen's hand, the Uchiha pulled out a kunai and attempted to stab the blonde's liver. Did you ever have to deal with every instructor at the academy deliberately undermining your training because they only wanted to see you fail? Asked Naruto as he swung his left knife hand horizontally, aiming for the Uchiha's chest as he made sure to coat his arm with wind chakra. Nibun, bisection. Fortunately, the Uchiha saw the attack coming and leapt back, only suffering a minor cut across his chest that ripped through his brand new Chunin vest. Before hurling them at the Uchiha, Naruto took 2 kuniyas with explosive tags out of his pocket and asked, have you ever been tortured alive? Your nerves were directly electrocuted, pleading with them to stop, only to have them laugh back at you. After going through some hand seals, Sasuke shot a ball of fire that consumed both kunai, but the tags continued to detonate, resulting in a massive fire that covered a sizable portion of the lake. There was fire in the lake. The teen's timing was perfect as he grabbed Sasuke's wrist, forcing him to drop the kunai before kneeing him in the stomach, causing him to cough in agony. Have you ever found one person in the world who you would love, only for her to suddenly die in front of your very eyes because some stuck-up prick? Uzumaki was baffled by how that was possible, but before he could even consider it, he saw Sasuke running towards him with a kunai in hand. Naruto screamed as he grabbed Sasuke by the shirt collar and held him aloft after punching him in the cheek. Now, Sasuke, tell me, which of us had a more difficult life? I don't know, you understand. I guess there's no point in continuing. I've already wasted enough time. The hunter nins and the rest of those kami dam anbus is probably fast approaching, Naruto said with a sigh as he threw Sasuke away. The blonde held out his left hand. Sasuke, I will kill you because I despise you as much as you despise your brother. As Sasuke slowly got to his feet, he remarked, you don't understand my hate, someone like you can't possibly understand it. You embody what I hate about Konoha. Naruto glared at Sasuke from beneath his mask as a sphere of chakra formed in his left hand. Likely the last one he could pull off for the rest of the day. Sasuke, you hate only one person, you hate your brother, he said, grinning maliciously beneath his mask. My hate stems for an entire village. I hate all of Konoha. I hate it for what it did to me, and what it did to her. With his red eyes, the teenager saw the sphere forming on the blonde's hand. Sasuke's mind was a blur from the beating he had received and the words of his former teammate. The hate, the anger, the rage. Is this who he could have become if he had let his hate for Itachi take over? The Ravenet's survival instincts took over as soon as he saw the sphere, and before he knew it, he had begun the hand seals required for his strongest jutsu. A few seconds later, blue lightning covered his right hand while birdsong chirped. As they held their respective jutsus in their hands, the two gazed at one another for a while before standing silently and waiting for the other to initiate contact. A light breeze blew from the wind. Ironically, the blonde was standing in front of the statue of Madara, while Sasuke was standing in front of the statue of Hashirama, and the two shinobi kicked off their respective spots and ran towards each other. Rasengan. Spiraling sphere. Chidori. 1,000 birds. However, Naruto abruptly stopped mid-charge before his Rasengan gradually dispelled itself, before the two could even clash their respective jutsus. What the hell? He asked in disbelief, only to see his shadow connected to a single, long thread of darkness. Coughing blood from his mouth while clinging to his still bleeding stomach, Shikamaru exclaimed, Kageme no jutsu success. Now Sasuke. The teenager cleared his throat. As he heard the sounds of 1,000 chirping birds, The blonde realized with horror. He pretended to get knocked out. Chidori. As his lightning-encased right hand pierced the disabled blonde's chest, Sasuke yelled, "This is for killing Yakumo," as tears streamed from his eyes, which by this point were gradually changing from their 3 Tomo forms to one that resembled a pinwheel. "But also, I'm sorry for everything," he said. "Did I lose? No, I can't lose here, not yet," Naruto thought as he felt the taste of iron and blood, his blood, shoot out of his mouth. The teenager opened his mouth and coughed out blood. Nay, help me," he yelled, not receiving a response from his tenant. His body ached, his chest burned, his wounds ached, his chakra was depleted, and he felt exhausted. Was this how it felt? How did she feel when she passed away? As his vision faltered, Naruto muttered, "Yakumo, maybe he would see her soon if he gave in and accepted the freeing hands of death." It sounded like a good idea. The blonde's body began to limp as it lost life, and he slowly closed his already heavy eyes. He started to remove the teen's body with his lightning-encased hand, but he stopped halfway through when what he believed to be the blonde's already dead right hand slashed towards his wrist, holding his left arm in place. "But I can't die yet, not until after I kill all of them," he whispered, looking the Uchiha in the eye. "Sayonara Naruto," he said. As his free hand approached the startled Chunin's face, the already pale Naruto spat out in rage, "Fuck you, Sasuke. I don't accept your apology. You won't be the one to kill me. I won't die, not yet." As his free hand landed squarely in front of the Uchiha's left eye, he continued. Several things occurred in a matter of seconds. To the horror of both Sasuke and Shikamaru, the blonde's free hand first removed Sasuke's left eye with all of his remaining strength. Second, a larger hole was made in the former Konoha nin's chest when Sasuke violently withdrew his Chidori from Naruto's grasp, causing him to scream in agony. Third was Naruto's laughter at the group, which only Shikamaru heard as he crushed the Uchiha's eyes in his hand and closed his eyes beneath his mask before he finally fell onto the lake, his body instantly carried downstream by the currents into the unknown. And he was gone in an instant. Satsujin, the killer's birth. Unknown place. Slowly, a pair of cerulean blue eyes opened, revealing to the wounded and dying boy a scene he had seen long ago. As he floated in the abyss, he could see the view of complete darkness that enveloped his body in its own special warmth. Then, like a reenactment of the past, he saw it again from the shadows of death. This time, he saw it in its fullness rather than just a glimpse. He had no idea what it was until recently, when his reliable tenant Eiko informed him that it was known as Akasha, the root, the site of the Akashic records, the swirl of the root, and the origin of all cosmic events and phenomena. A location that exists outside of time, where all past, present, and future events and possibilities are kept, along with the souls of all living things who have accepted death. Many people have attempted to enter this plane of existence in the hopes of catching a fleeting glimpse of the library of all events, but they have all failed. However, he, a single, inconsequential life, has now traveled to this exact location twice in his life. Before, he felt that attempting to put it into words would be an insult to its great existence, but now he knew the ideal word to describe everything his blue eyes saw. He had previously been unable to do so due to a lack of knowledge. Even though it was everything, it was still nothing at its core. A vast emptiness. The empty space. He felt as though it was staring back at him as he gazed into the vast abyss that held all the last information about everything that had ever happened in the world. He tried to touch it and hold it in the palms of his own hands, just like that time long ago, but his arms were limp and in pain. This time, there was no pull that dragged him away, and since it remained in his line of sight, no tears were necessary. Then his hands finally made contact with it. The teenager experienced the emptiness for the first time in his life and bonded with this immense emptiness. Satsujin. The killer's birth in the vicinity of Takigakure. He would be lucky to find the blonde alive, and even luckier if the seal hasn't been broken yet and the great Kyuubi hasn't been released upon the lands. If it has, he must contact Danzo-sama right away so they can contain it lest another nation takes it from them. The root Anbusai cautiously kicked off from tree to tree perched aside the rivers where he tracked down the fallen body Uzumaki. If he was permitted to show any emotion, he would likely be frowning due to the Uchiha's actions. The pale teenager was deep in thought when he was abruptly startled out of it by the sight of a mop of blonde hair floating down the river. Target found. The user of the ink was about to leap down and pick up the boy's body, but he had to force himself to stop when he saw a big, muscular man wearing gray pants and a sleeveless black vest. The man had raven black hair that covered one of his eyes. He had no idea where the man had come from, but the next thing he knew, he was standing over the murderer's unconscious body. That's recalling the man's face from the bingo book, Sai thought. After looking at the blonde's unconscious body for a few seconds, the man knelt, lifted the boy, and slung him over his shoulders. When the man suddenly glared at him, Sai instantly took out a scroll and his ink brush, but he froze in place. Gulping and sweating coldly, he had never felt such a killing intent and presence in his entire life, and he was certain that he would be crushed the moment he attacked. The root operative did not dare stop the man as he departed with his target in tow, following the obvious logical course of action. This is not good. With no other option but to back off, he hoped Danzo-sama would comprehend, but he had his doubts that he would be happy to hear this news. Sai took one last long look at his target and the retreating figure of the large man before disappearing in a swirl of ink, but not after discovering that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was in the hands of the S-rank nin, the Akai Kishin, Red Fierce God.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.